Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our Monday, July 10th City Council meeting. May I please have a report on the posting? Sorry, may I please have a report on the closed session? Sorry. I'm reading the wrong thing. I'm just trying to think who's going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, we'll go with the roll call.
Councilmember Lamont?
Here.
Councilmember Rosenthal?
Here.
Councilmember Wagner?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Mullen?
Here.
Mayor Peak?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Heather.
Now we do the pledge.
All right, Norm, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you, Norm. Christy, may I please have a closed session report?
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, members of the council. Tonight's regular meeting convened at 5:30, at which time the council recessed to a closed session pursuant to Government Code sections 54956.8 and 54956.9D1. The council discussed all of the items that are listed on the posted agenda, or the amended agenda, but tonight took only one reportable action. And that had to do with the case entitled The Park at Cross Creek and the Malibu Bay Company versus City of Malibu. That's the case involving the Citizens Initiative Measure R. The council voted unanimously to seek a petition in the Supreme Court to review the decision by the Court of Appeal. The decision, as you know, casts quite a shadow over the regulation of chain stores, and it restricts the ability of voters to control planning in a new and different way. And so we'll ask the Supreme Court to look at those two things. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Christy. May I please have an approval of the agenda? Are we going to reorganize?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda with just a suggestion that we do the appeal before the consent calendar, or we can wait. It doesn't. I just wanted to see what people think. We don't have as many public speakers as maybe we thought, but how many public speakers do we have for 3-1A? 2 for 3. Oh, 3A1. Oh,
and
okay.
2 other items have been pulled off the consent calendar.
Okay, so maybe we don't have to do that.
But how many speakers are there for the other items?
On the consent calendar? 3.
So we don't have to do it. Okay, so I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Oh, I'll second the motion, and I'd like to discuss 3B9 and 4B later on.
Okay.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, we're going to have a presentation from the Southern California Gas Company Affairs Manager, Mike Harriel. Good evening, Mike.
Good evening, Mayor. Gas Public Affairs Manager that is assigned to the City of Malibu. And I briefed you all about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, a little different council members back then, but on this particular project, our advanced meter project. So 2 years later, I thought it might be a good idea to come and give you an update on where we are with this project in case you get any questions or asked any information about it. Next slide, please. Do I? So the advanced meter project, just to give you a little background, it's a CPUC mandated project where we are required to automate the way that we read meters. So instead of actually sending an individual out to each home to read a meter, we can read it electronically and a little bit more efficiently because, you know, as humans, we sometimes make errors in how we read. With this is new technology, which most utility companies are now doing to the way that they read their meters. It is a project that is a cost savings project for our ratepayers. It's a ratepayer funded project. So the ratepayers for Malibu have paid into this project in order for us to implement it. And once we are fully deployed, there will be a rate of return that the residents of Malibu receive. It's roughly about 3 times the amount that they put in. This project, we are designated to be fully deployed by the end of 2017. So far, we have 6 million meters that have already been changed out. Malibu is one of the last coastal cities for us to deploy this project. So we've all along the coast, El Segundo, Santa Monica, those cities were already fully deployed, and those customers in those cities are taking advantage of the benefits of this project. Let's give a little bit of background on how it works. We have data collector units that are installed. Some are on poles, some are attached to existing streetlights. They're solar powered or AC powered. We like the solar power, a little more environmentally friendly. We can read the meter electronically, and then that data gets pushed out to the customers where they can monitor what their usage is. If they need to do anything as far as their usage, if there's any usage that isn't quite right, then they're able to pick up on it. They can utilize their smartphone, a computer, or actually just call in and obtain alerts or have alerts sent out to them regarding their usage. Some of the benefits that are associated with this project, one is we have the capacity, once we're fully deployed, to monitor the gas pressure in our gas system. So we can see and determine whether or not there are any leaks or anything that's going on with the pressure isn't quite right. Just once we get our network up, we're able to enhance customer safety by assisting them with increased consumption. So if there's a leak, a house line leak, customer may not be aware of it. They may smell it. It may be dissipating out into the air, but based on how the usage is in the past, we're able to look at that and determine whether or not that something isn't quite the way it should be, and we can engage the customer and find out exactly what's going on. There's also an energy and water conservation component to this, whereas if you have a leak on your hot water side, the water going through there is leaking, and it's hot water that's leaking. And so that will show up in consumption as well. You know, I mean, hot water leaking is your hot water heater is going to cycle on and off constantly at times when no one may be there. So with this particular technology, we're able to identify that, and we have already, where it's already been implemented, been able to determine leaks that have occurred on the hot water side. Also, we're improving the air quality. So we're taking roughly about 1,000 of our vehicles off the road. So the carbon footprint that we have is being reduced. So we don't have employees that are running up and down PCH in their trucks to come and read meters. Since we're doing it all electronically, and those positions are no longer in SoCalGas, we can utilize those employees to do other customer service and other office type positions. And also, this is the big one that most of our customers like. It's increased security and privacy. So we no longer have to have an employee or a stranger, if you will, go to your home, walk around, try to find out where the meter is, go inside your gate, knock on the door if they can't get in. You no longer have to put up pets. You no longer have to provide us with a key to get through the gate. So a lot of our customers really like that particular feature. We need to install 29 data collector units. We already have 4 installed at the addresses you see up above there. And 2 of those photographs show 2 actual data collector units that are on light poles. And you can see they're very unobtrusive. They, you don't really notice them unless you're really looking for them. We get asked often, why do you have to install new poles? Why can't you just attach to existing poles that are already on the city right away? So there are some considerations that we have to take into consideration when we are installing the data collector unit. One is the GO95 rules that require separation between energized lines and our antennas. We have an existing agreement with Edison where they have very clear requirements on when we can attach and when we can't. And then we have the search rings that we've done to make sure that our network can satisfy every area that it needs to. So they're positioned in certain areas. So we have to try to stay within that particular search ring. There are also some safety parameters to this project where we will be installing methane sensors so that we can kind of determine whether or not there's any methane leaking. And we've already deployed over 18 sensors within our network throughout our service territory. Again, as I mentioned, we are able to monitor a pipeline system. And then also, we're automating a lot of our critical valves. So if an emergency were to occur in a certain area, a fire, some other disaster, and we need to shut the gas off running into that area, we can do it very quickly to that entire area, as opposed to deploying a crew, digging a hole, reaching the valve, and then operating it. So we can respond much quicker. So we have a commitment that we have with all of our customers in doing this project. One is that we visit every customer wherever we are installing a pole in the area. So we're knocking on the doors, we're talking to the homeowner. If they're not there to talk to, we're leaving information and contact information for them to call us back, because we want to make sure that they're aware of what we're doing. We are constantly keeping the residents informed about our schedules, about what it is we need to do, what it is we want to do, and why we have to do it. We know that the view is very important to the residents of Malibu. So if we're installing a pole in an area that we think may be a problem, we're working with the customer. We have an item we call a story pole, which is a portable pole that we can pull up to show them where the pole will be, what it will look like. And there's been instances where some of the residents say, you know, I don't like it there, it's going to detract my view. So we've been able to move it a couple of feet over or do whatever we need to do so that it is in an area that is appealing to the residents. These are just some of the addresses where we have been working with the customers, with the residents of Malibu, to determine that we need to move our poles to different locations or adjust them a little bit so that we're not affecting the quality of life. Broad Beach was an interesting one because we didn't realize that that whole area was, the utilities are underground. So after talking with I believe the homeowners association person there, we determined that, okay, we cannot put any poles in this area at all. We have to find other locations. So again, we're doing everything that we can to work with the customers, to work with the residents, and we're doing this throughout this entire project in our entire service territory. Even though it's a mandated project, we're not just going in and just putting poles where we want to, but we are working with the city and the residents. Part of our collaboration, we are working with the city planning department. We are working with the government affairs agency, so the assembly member, county board of supervisor, state senator, we made them all aware of the project. Chamber of Commerce, we've talked to them about the project and met with their committees. City Council, I'm briefing you now on it, and I always want to keep you abreast of what's going on. The commercial, residential customers, and we've also provided advertisements in the local newspapers of Malibu so the residents are aware of what's going on. And whenever we can, we try to engage ourselves in a lot of community activities and events, have tables, have samples of what the equipment looks like, and provide the residents with information. And that's it. As I mentioned, I'm the public affairs manager. I have my experts in the back of the room in case you have any technical questions that they can answer for you if you like. That completes my presentation.
I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
What is your answer to those who are concerned about, you know, another thing doing electromagnetic radiation from their home? I know people have brought that up before. And-
That's
and
a good question.
When this first came out, was there an opt-out feature? And can you talk to that and address
Yes.
some of those concerns? Thank you.
Yes, first question, this is a battery-operated device, so it's not electricity. It's not like your electric meter. Your electric meter talks back and forth to different meters on your street or your different appliances. It's a great technology, but this technology doesn't do that. It's battery-operated. All we're doing is changing out the front dial, and we're putting a battery on it. It's a battery that is supposed to last 20 years. The reason why it lasts so long, because the meter is only on for a fraction of a second. It's just a burst of information. It is, on average, it is on 2 minutes a year. So it's just a fraction of the information. And the opt-out, there is an opt-out. The opt-out, the requirements for the opt-out is what the CPUC designated, which is the same as the electric meter. It's a $75 one-time fee to opt out, and then it's $10 a month. And the $10 fee is what it costs to send an employee out to actually read your meter. So that is the opt-out arrangement.
All right, thanks very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very
Mike,
much.
thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Heather, may I please have a report on the posting of the agenda?
The agenda for this meeting was properly posted on June 30th, 2017, with the amended agenda posted on July 6th, 2017.
Thank you, Heather. We're going to have a couple public speakers now. Norm Haney, followed by John Mazza, followed by Lloyd Ahern, followed by William Carson.
Good evening, City Council members. I have an unusual situation. It has to do with interpretation of a provision of Malibu's municipal code. The planning department has apparently made a determination that if you make an application to remove something, to demolish something, you can't have it removed unless there is a new project proposed to take its place. That apparently is what the interpretation is by the planning department, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. And if you read the words, a person could interpret it that way. But let's say a person had a wall that was in the front yard setback and it was 10 feet high, and it blocked a neighbor's view of the ocean, and you made an application to remove it. It's likely the planning department would deny it, saying, well, what are you going to replace it with? And of course your answer would be, I'm not going to replace it with anything. I'm going to fill the hole for the foundation and plant grass. In my opinion, that alone can be the replacement project. You don't have to build something in something's place when it's being removed. Take the gas station canopies on a property that I'm familiar with and everyone else is as well. If I made an application, a separate application, notwithstanding the fact that I have to remove them to build one or the other buildings I'm proposing, let's just take it as it is. I make an application to remove the canopies and it has nothing whatsoever to do with the projects that I made an application for, and I won't use it to vest. I can't get a permit from the planning department to do that. They'd say, well, but what are you going to replace it with? Right now, I'm not going to replace it with anything unless the city approves a project. But in the meantime, I'm going to fill the hole with dirt and gravel and do nothing except celebrate the fact that those ugly canopies are gone. So, but I can't do that under the interpretation. Now, the particular project that I have submitted is the removal of an existing foundation that burned out, the house above it burned out 34 years ago. It's probably over 50 years old. And we want to remove it, and we want to compact the soil, and we want to put a drainage system in and a biofiltration system. Part of that is because the neighbor adjacent to that property has agreed, they've made a deal where he wants to use the property for passive recreation, and he can't do that. And I think that's wrong. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Norm. John Mazza, followed by Lloyd Ahern.
First, I want to thank you for your decision on appealing Measure R. Finally, we get a conclusion, hopefully. I recently read about a bill in the Assembly called AB 250. I believe it's also in the Senate. And it's sponsored by a friend of Malibu, Senator Stern. But it is, to me, very, very alarming. To me, it's the biggest threat to the sovereignty of Malibu since we became a city. What the bill basically says is if you're public land or you're owned by a tax-free agency, a state park, federal park, local park, whatever, you can go to a developer and let him build residences, motels, yurts, campsites, cabins, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, on that property. And the city of Malibu has zero say in it. Now, the city of Malibu has over 2 square miles of those lands in the city boundaries, and we are surrounded by national and state parks and MRCA property. Surrounded. This bill would allow camping on all of that land. It would allow motels on all of that land. And as Jefferson knows, the state parks, for example, we're on a board where we're trying to protect Adamson House. We don't have enough money to buy screen doors. The state parks has zero money to build anything. So the bill authorizes these agencies to go to private developers and let them do it. Well, you see what it costs to go to the Ahwahnee. You go down to Crystal Cove, state park land, spent $780,000 rebuilding each shack they have. They don't rent for $50 a night. Those are rented by rich people. They start at $400. So this is nothing more than taking the rights of Malibu away on development in their city and threatens us with development all around us that includes camping. So I ask you to agendize an item and have Christie come back and tell you exactly what this is all about, because you need to oppose this. Imagine if Donald Trump came out and said, all national parks, which is most of the mountains behind us, you can build whatever you want. What would you think about that? It doesn't make a difference whether it's Donald Trump or Senator Stern or somebody else. It is not good for Malibu, and it takes away your and our rights to develop the way we see fit. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Lloyd, followed by William Carson.
Good evening, City Council. My name is Lloyd Ahern, and I'm just checking with you, Skylar, to see how your telephone call went. Did you guys go out to lunch? Was the phone call fun with Joe? So I'd love to hear. He knows what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'd love to hear when you're speaking. Thanks.
Thank you kindly, Lloyd.
Yes.
William?
Well, I wasn't sure what I was going to be doing today, and I think I went to the right place. And the right place is the city. And you can make some ideas, thoughts about what to do and what's bad. That in the sewer activities, there is miserable thing. Everybody, now that they're moving off to places like city, like homes, we have no real roads and that sort of stuff. That the roads and erosion of properties here are big. Why do we have to spend 16, 15 years sitting around for that? And another worry on my part is what are the timings of the sewer business? And since I didn't know what I was going to talk about, thank you anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Carson. That concludes public comment. And we're now at, do we have any commission updates? No? City manager update.
Good evening. I'd like to start by thanking all of our firefighters and our law enforcement for the work that they did on the two fires that broke out about the same time on June 29th. I'm very appreciative for the quick work in getting those out, as that could have really affected our community. And we also had a fire preparedness meeting scheduled for that same night, which was canceled because all of our speakers were participating in the fire. So that town hall meeting has been rescheduled for July 19th at 7 o'clock here in the City Council chambers. So I encourage people to attend and learn what they can do to be prepared for fire here in our city. Our concert on the Bluffs tickets are available and on sale. We've sold over 300 tickets already, so I encourage people to please go online and get a ticket before it sells out. We're expecting a terrific event, and that's scheduled for August 20th. And just to remind everybody that we will not have a city council meeting on July 24th. It's the meeting that we're dark in the summer, so our next city council meeting will be August 14th. Thanks.
Thank you, Riva. Who would like to start? Lou?
I have a question for Mr. Mazza. Did you say SB 250? If it's Senator Stern, it would have to be an SB bill. Because SB 250 is about feeding pupils.
He is a senator. The press release put out said AB for some reason.
Okay. I'll check it out. Thank you. I went to the first meeting of the League of California Cities Coastal Cities Leadership Committee meeting in Monterey. I met all 5 of the state's other representatives, and strangely enough, the Coastal Commission was number 1 on all of our lists. So I'll keep you posted as that progresses. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the managed breach that we've been trying to accomplish by Surfrider Beach for a long time. And after our discussion last week, I spoke with John Kelly from LA County Beaches and Harbors about reforming the group that we had before, and which included representatives from all the jurisdictions that have any right to say anything at all about that whole area about the managed breach. I've also heard from Michael Blum from the Malibu Surfing Association. He's on board. And I met with the mayor and Riva earlier, and we're going to start to put this together, and we'll keep you posted as we move forward. And on Wednesday, I'm going to Alhambra for the LA County Commission on Alcohol and Other Drugs, and that's what I've got.
Thank you, Lou. Jefferson?
Thank you. We had a brief scoping meeting today on the same subject, Lou, and thank you very much for following through, and I'm sure the surfer community will appreciate your efforts as well as the full council if we decide to go that route. And thank you very much. Appreciate you following up on that.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. At least it's air conditioned in here, which is nice. So, John, I think what Lou was trying to say was that AB stands for Assembly Bill and SB stands for Senate Bill, so a senator would not bring up, could not bring up an Assembly Bill, but maybe, Reva, we can ask Cal Strategies to look into that and give us a report, because sometimes it can appear to be one thing and it really is something completely different. So,
Reva actually has information if you want to hear it.
oh, okay.
The co-authors are Assembly Members Chu and Friedman, McCarthy and Stone, and Senator Atkins, Hertzberg, and Stern are just co-authors. So they're not the lead bill. That's why it's out of the
principal
Assembly.
author is-
Yeah, they're not the principal authors.
Who's the
They're-
principal author?
The principal authors are Assembly Members Chu, Friedman, McCarty, and Stone.
Isn't it Lorena Gonzalez?
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. You're right. Yes, I'm sorry. I was reading that wrong. Lorena Gonzalez, yes,
And Friedman?
are co-authors.
Yeah, okay, but maybe, and I can contact Assembly Member Friedman, but we can get a report from Cal Strategies. Thank you. Just a couple of things. I was at a Southern California Association of Governments meeting last week. I'm on the Energy and Environment Committee. We actually had some presentations about community choice. There's going to be a big report on that coming out, and a chance for people to get some more information, and that's the county is doing a community choice for energy, and the city will be looking at whether we want to opt in that for the city so that we're getting more of our energy from renewables, all done through Southern California Edison. So we'll have more information on that. And it was really nice. Our Public Works Director, Bob Brager, was there, along with our consultant for our PCH safety study and our PCH parking study, because SCAG gave us some of the money to do those studies. So they did a report to the Transportation Committee there. So it was nice to see Bob at that. We had a bus stop. We now have four bus stops that have bus shelters. So we did a ribbon cutting of that last week. Rick and I were able to be there, so very excited, especially with this heat and the sun, to be able to have a little bit of shelter at 4 bus stops, the most popular bus stops. We also had, I think, our last Malibu Unification Negotiation Committee meeting, and that's to separate our school district. We are right now working on the final amended report to give to the school board, and it will also be presented. And at our next meeting in August, in the beginning of August, I'll be able to give you some more information. It's not quite finished. It's not that dissimilar to the report that the City Council unanimously approved, but it is a different version because we have new information now. I went to an art opening on Saturday night in Malibu Village, and it's the Seasick in Paradise. And so there's actually going to be a panel discussion this Thursday here at City Hall at 6:30, and it's called The New Lineup: Surfing Sea Level Rise, Access, and Inclusion in the 21st Century. And it's part of the programming associated with the really interesting art exhibit that's now at Deep Art Foundation's gallery in Malibu Village, and it's going to explore challenges to the coast and the future of surfing here. And it's going to be moderated by John Christensen, who's a professor at the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability at UCLA. And as all of these talks are, it's free, open to the public, and you can get more information at departfoundation.com. And then I also wanted to thank our firefighters and our first responders, and I actually got caught in Santa Monica when PCH was closed, but they kept in touch and really gave us good information. And I know this past weekend was really crazy here in Malibu, and our sheriffs had great plans and really did a good job. Zuma Beach parking lot was full, Westward Beach parking lot was full, and they had to do a lot of work keeping PCH moving. So I just wanted to thank our volunteers on patrol and also our sheriffs for all of the work. And that's it.
Thank you, Laura. Rick?
I'll talk about another fire department intervention, and not something that I was involved in, but a bunch of people contacted me over the last few weeks about a homeless woman who was pregnant, and they were concerned about her health and safety, and admonished me as a council member and as a fire department guy to do something about it. But you can't force people to do something when they don't have to. And her water broke, and the professionals from Fire Station 88 showed up on the scene. And just a little background, the outreach workers had been working with her for a long time, and they're very good at developing relationships and bridging the sort of cultural divide, and even they couldn't get her to go to the hospital. But at the key moment, the fire department showed up, and there was one particular engineer, Gene Rink, bit of a athletic legend in the fire department, who spoke to her, and initially she resisted, and then he finally got her to consent and go to the hospital. Thank God. It's a big deal, actually, and I think getting command of your personality, and I know the sheriffs in the back will understand this, that interacting with people and being able to manage your own personality and have empathy with someone who that you're dealing with is a key thing, and that was a very important critical moment in time where the right guy showed up and used the right words, and disaster was averted. So it's an interesting story, and it's another excellent reflection on our fire department professionals. And I'm speaking with my city council hat on right now. I also went, in my role as a captain of the fire department, happened to go to the opening of Campus Kilpatrick, which is a $50 million renovation of a juvenile detention facility that's right up in the hills above Malibu. It's been there for many years, along with Camp David Gonzalez. And the word paradigm shift is overused, definitely, but this is a paradigm shift. And I have a friend who is a Malibu resident who's been a counselor there for years under the old system, and this is really groundbreaking facility that they've built. And they're truly going from the imprisonment and punishment to making a very concerted effort and putting a lot of money, time, resources, talent, people into the rehabilitation effort. And the facilities are really wonderful. I mean, the gym is practically better than Pepperdine, and the little lodges that they have are, I almost felt like I was going skiing in Mammoth. It's kind of weird when you think about it, but if ever there was an opportunity to sort of change the paradigm of people in prison and incarceration, this is where it's going to happen. And I spoke to my friend, I said, is this like one of the best in California? And he said, no, there's nothing like this in the United States, and it's a completely new paradigm that the County of Los Angeles has put some major funding into it. So it was a very interesting event. Just wanted everybody to know that, because there's not much visibility on that here in Malibu. Max Jabin of the Malibu Aquatic Society alerted me to the fact that they're doing they're putting together, along with working with the city, to put an event called the Malibu Mile on September 10. It's sort of a fundraising event for the Malibu Aquatic Association. It's not to interfere with traffic or anything like that. It's just on the beach, and it's going to be on the tail end of another event. So that's interesting. There'll be more information about that coming out. I appreciate those guys, doing what's necessary to raise funds for their own organization. It's really good. I was on the Topanga fire. I was working that day. I heard the Stokes fire go out. We were at the far end of our district. We came back in. We went down to Topanga fire, and when I was going down PCH, I saw the smoke, and I thought, this is the big one. This is it. It's the worst case scenario. And Topanga is always the worst thing where people think a fire is going to be, and it was near the ocean going up, and that's bad. There's only one way out of that canyon. Fortunately, in very short order, all the county aircraft put that fire out. and it really was just the aircraft because it was extremely challenging terrain. In fact, we had to use a ladder to try and get up on the cliff face, which was really inconsequential. And it's important for people to realize that there is no other fire department in the world that has the air capabilities that the County of Los Angeles does. And the professionals were on it immediately, and they literally put that fire, there were 2 fires at one time. 2 fires going at one time. One was up on Stokes, and the other one was at Topanga. And the aircraft put that fire essentially out without people really getting their hands on it. Very impressive. I also got some information on AB 250, and it is called AB 250. And I asked Riva to get some information from our lobbyists up in Sacramento, and there are some interesting things about it. And John's right. We need to pay attention to this, and we really need to kind of figure out what's going on. Whenever there's building and construction, and for the purposes of disadvantaged or low-income people, it's something that touches our heart, but it's also something that probably should make a red flag go up. And I'm thinking of things like the Community Reinvestment Act, that for all the noblest reasons for wanting to get people nice houses, eventually turned out to the subprime mortgage crisis. So it bears watching. Let's find out about it. Let's get some more information. Does it supersede our local control? Let's find out about it. So I'll be looking into it and possibly putting together a letter for the council to consider, or maybe just sending a letter on my own. I will keep you informed about that. I'd like to get some comments later about Norm's comments about removing something, and can you only do that when you're building something? Because it sounds like that might be a great thing to have people removing things and putting nothing there. So I'd just like to get a comment about that. And that is it. Thanks very much.
Did you want staff to respond to that now about Norm's question?
Yeah, that'd be great.
While Bonnie's coming up, Laura.
Rick, thank you for bringing up about Camp Kilpatrick. There's a really good article in the LA Times that came out last week or the week before about it. It's really interesting, and Rick's absolutely right. It's a new paradigm, but it's only new to LA and California. It's actually all built on, I can't remember if it's the Wisconsin model or the Madison model, but it's a model of working with youth offenders that has shown incredible outcomes. And so that's what it's all based on right now. And as a LA County Library Commissioner, we were able to put in a library and put some money into that. So I know a little bit about it, and it's hopefully going to be just as successful as it's been in other places. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, one last comment also, and Riva did mention this, but the fire safety meeting, town hall meeting on July 19, I wanted to reemphasize that did get canceled right during the fire, so everyone should come out. And this is going to be the first of a series of regularly scheduled town hall meetings to discuss public safety related issues. Future topics may involve earthquakes, terrorist or active shooter incidents, storms and flooding. So very important for people to attend. This is Natural Disaster Central, so you might as well get educated on it.
Thank you, Rick. Bonnie?
Good evening, City Council. The Planning Department's been in discussions with Norm and on behalf of his client for a couple of weeks now, or maybe longer, on this question of demolition. The municipal code is really specific about when you can obtain a demolition permit, and it says that a demolition permit under this chapter shall be required for the demolition of any building or structure or for a substantial remodel except for demolition initiated by the city and ordered or authorized under provisions of the building code. And then in order to approve a demolition permit, it shall not be approved unless and until all discretionary permits for the new project are approved. And then it allows for exceptions in cases where there is a subsequent, a persistent or habitual code violation, or if the building safety director determines that there's a hazard on a site that warrants being dealt with separate from whatever future development might be proposed. I don't know if there's a specific project Norm has in mind with the fence or wall, and I don't see a problem with someone removing a fence or a wall in advance of having a replacement plan. That I think is a little distinct from something of the scale that he's talking about now, which has to do with removal of an entire slab on a property that's been in place. It's been in the same condition for more than 20 years, and the development that's the owner would like to propose is scheduled for the Planning Commission very shortly. So there are alternate ways of securing the property short of demolition. The other thing I should mention is that the demolition of this slab will involve additional development after the slab is pulled out. It's a geotechnically sensitive site. The site will need to be regraded and a berm constructed and drainage devices installed in order to stabilize it until the final proposed project is ready. So this is a long way of saying there's additional circumstances involved in this case. There's the opportunity for the Planning Commission to grant a demolition permit if they find that there is a hazardous condition. And we've made that opportunity available to Mr. Haney, and I don't know if he's planning on pursuing that or not at this point.
Okay, just hypothetical. I want to buy my neighbor's house and remove it and return it back to its natural state. Is that possible?
I would say yes if your plans are to, for instance, install landscaping or something like that, then
Fully
yes.
remediate it back to its natural state. Okay,
Right. That would be the alternative development plan.
so that is possible. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Bonnie. I attended the opening of the art show that Laura referenced down in Malibu Village at the old unit where Banana Republic was, and it's an awesome art show that really connects, the surfing aspect of our community to the art world. So I would encourage people to pass through there when they're in the neighborhood and check it out. And I don't really have a lot to report because I'm not feeling 100% and I don't want to talk too much, so I'm going to move on. We're going to move on to the consent calendar, and we're going to approve the consent calendar with items 3A, 3B7, 3B8, 3B9, and that's it, pulled. Yeah, that's why we're pulling it, so we can do that.
I'll make a motion to approve with 3A, 3B7, 8, and 9 pulled.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we're going to start with 3A1, and we'll start with a short staff report before we go to public comment.
Good evening, Mayor Peak and City Council. So we're here tonight for the second reading of the ordinance 421. The amendments that council recommended were made to the ordinance, and just want to say a couple of things in regards to the ordinance. I'm really kind of surprised by the amount of misinformation that's being dealt. I'm sure a lot of you have heard it as well. Everybody that I'm aware of in city and my staff has received a lot of this, but most of that is misinformation. I'll be glad to answer any questions about tonight. A lot of people are claiming and saying this is really a new, sort of like a new toolbox or a new program the city is implementing. And I want to make it clear, this is just an amendment to existing wastewater management program by adding this amended part of this chapter, and that's all it really is. It's not a new toolbox, it's just simply a new tool. So just to be clear, if you were a property owner in Big Rock that had rental property and you were pumping that wastewater system once a year, you would not be impacted by this new tool. If you're a property owner on Malibu Colony and you're pumping your wastewater system twice a year, you would not be impacted by this new tool. If you were a property owner in Malibu Riviera and you were pumping your septic system twice every 6 months, you would not be impacted by this ordinance. So it is very simple. It just simply states if you pump your system 3 or more times in a 6-month period, you have to have the system inspected. If that inspection reveals that there's maintenance required, let's just say root intrusion, and you remove the roots as part of the maintenance, and the system is functional, you're done. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to obtain an operating permit. You don't have to do anything more. If that system is failed and it is deemed failed, then you would need to repair that system or replace that system. And that is true without this ordinance in place today. If you come in tomorrow and you have an identified failed septic system, you're going to have to do the work to either fix it or replace it. And part of that program currently, not new with this, but currently is to obtain an operating permit. So I think a lot of the misinformation that's out there can be answered tonight. I look forward to your questions, and I'm here to answer those. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Craig. We're gonna, okay, go ahead.
Even though I believe I know the answer to this, I just had promised a couple of people that I would just say it out loud, even though you really already said it. So if you own a home and you do short-term rentals or long-term rentals, and you don't have an issue with your septic system, it's not being pumped, you do not have to go and get a permit at this time. True or false?
That's true. You
Okay.
do not have to get a permit at this time.
Okay, thank you. And can you give us some reasoning for the, and I think you already have, about the 30 days, why it would need to be done in 30 days, the application?
And I think I need to make that clear too, because once the system is has been pumped, say 3 times, you're required to get an inspection. After that inspection is performed and it's identified as needing repair, only when it's identified as needing repair, you have to make the application within 30 days of that. So you've already gone through the process. It's not that you have to turn in the application within 10 days is the correct number. And then you have to submit for permits, as just make a submittal within the 30 days. It doesn't mean it has to be done. It doesn't mean it has to be designed. You just have to turn in an application that you are moving in that direction.
Thank you. I think that's a lot of the questions that people had. Thank you.
All right, we're gonna go to public comment now. So I believe Mike, I do not know how to, Vaughn, sorry. Mike Vaughn, followed by Lauren Beck, followed by Norm Haney.
Thank you all for your time. First of all, I'd like to thank the fire department personally, as I had a fire about 200 yards from my home. Unfortunately, there was an aviation plane that dropped water on it and saved my house and several others in Big Rock. And for them, I want to thank them gravely. There was a lot of misconception about the septic system. I received numerous calls from numerous people who over-exaggerated this. And it was a great concern to me and to that of my neighbors. And I must say, I'm quite disappointed that more people didn't show up to address this situation. Because the way it was proposed to us, that it was going to be mandatory that our septic systems all be upgraded to the current code. Now, this is a great misrepresentation by some individuals within the city. I think it's very important that we clarify this and make sure that this does not happen. And it's spoken through the newspaper and through y'all about the truths when these type of rumors occur. I personally showed up because I thought that this may affect me. I live on Big Rock. I built my home on Big Rock after a fire. I purchased the property. I made sure that my septic system was up to code. I had an engineer inspect it. The city approved it. And I moved on. So I was very concerned when I was told the opposite. It would have meant tearing down my trash container, tearing out my complete driveway, and putting in a new system that's likely would have to be up to code that could have easily exceeded $60,000. One thing I would like to bring up to the public is the fact that if you have an earthquake or if you have a fire and it causes any damage to that septic system, that septic system will, on the California insurance law, be upgraded to current codes. That's unless somebody makes a silly mistake of not paying an extra $20 a year to have that code upgrade coverage. So I thought it was important that everybody knew that, but more importantly, I was very disappointed to get these telephone calls by 2 or 3 individuals, for both my father and myself, saying that everybody in Malibu was going to have to replace their septic system if it was over a certain years old or if you sold your home. And quite frankly, after what I've heard today from this gentleman and from the follow-up from Laura, I feel much better about this situation. And I certainly hope that this word gets out to the public tomorrow, because a lot of people, my wife's sitting home taking care of her 98-year-old mother, and she wanted to come and express her concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Lauren Beck, followed by Norm Haney, followed by Paul Grisani.
Thank you very much, Mayor, City Council. There is a lot of misconception about this ordinance, and most of it stems from people talking about it without having read it. The ordinance defines a failed system as a system that has been pumped. It used to say more than 2 times in 180 days, and now it says 3 or more times in 180 days. It doesn't say that it will be inspected and determined to be failed or not. It creates a new definition of what a failed system is. A failed system is no longer a system that is backed up and is leaking onto your property. A failed system is now any system, by definition in the statute, that has been pumped 3 or more times in 180 days. And, you know, I've submitted a letter through council, and it goes into a lot of detail, and I'm, without waiving any of the issues raised in that letter, I want to bring up really only 2 points. The first point is that the 180-day time period for pumping, it's arbitrary. And you don't have to take my word for it. Out there is an expert report submitted by a Harvard-educated engineer that is an expert in these matters. Pumping is not indicative of anything. Pumping, many people pump as a prophylactic to prevent an overflow. I, for one, at many properties that I manage, have pumped on routine basis to manage excessive water usage compared to what the system is intended to handle to avoid any potential environmental overflow. What would have mitigated that would have been the installation of a gray water system, but the city refused to allow me to have a gray water system, and so I couldn't reduce the amount of effluent flowing into the tank. But pumping liquid from a pit is prophylactic. It's not indicative of a failed system. It doesn't mean that my system isn't percolating. It doesn't mean that your system isn't percolating. It means that your system now has more water in it than it was intended to handle, and you have to pump. And a lot of people have pumped as a prophylactic measure. It doesn't mean that the system has failed. And the ordinance doesn't distinguish between prophylactic pumping and pumping because the system is backed up. The ordinance is indiscriminate. And, you know, with all due respect, what's been said about pumping in the systems and how it degrades the system is just wrong. Pumping water from a pit doesn't destroy the bacteria in the system. Pumping water from a pit is merely a prophylactic measure and does not affect the operation of the septic system itself. 3 times in 180 days is artificial, and it comes out of thin air. It's not based on anything. It's not based on any standard in the industry. It's not based on anything at all. It's just a random standard unsupported by anything that I could find anywhere. And as to the second point, this proposed ordinance supposedly has an environmental purpose, but it'll disincentivize people from pumping on a prophylactic basis. When faced with the choice, am I going to get caught into this system?
You got 15 seconds.
People are going to avoid pumping to prevent overflows, and we're going to be faced with more overflows in our community, and then the city will come in and could require us to upgrade our systems could require us to put in $60,000, $120,000, $250,000 systems just because we pumped 3 times in 180 days.
Thank you, Lauren. Norm, followed by Paul Grisani.
Good evening again, City Council members. A little over 30 days ago, the Wastewater Advisory Committee heard discussions from the public and commented on all the questions that were raised at that meeting. And there were about, I'm going to guess, 25 people there, of which approximately 8 people had questions and they were answered. At the end of that meeting, the Wastewater Advisory Committee, which is made up of professionals, people that actually design these systems and install them and inspect them, and they're registered by the City of Malibu, and many of them have state license to do exactly what they do. They supported this program and this definition of what failure is. The gentleman just before me said that if we're using a system to a much greater extent than it was ever meant to be used, then how can that be defined as a failure? Well, clearly, the system is not operating the way it was supposed to operate. There are too many people in the house, too many parties each weekend. A system should be upgraded to meet the requirements of a particular use in a particular area. If it's a residential use, a man and a wife, 3 kids, and it doesn't work properly, it can't handle the water that's put into it, has to be pumped more than 3 times or more, it's not operating properly. It has failed. When you pump a pit, it's because the pit is not percolating consistent with the needs of the use of the facility. So that is, and it needs to be fixed. And yes, people are going to have to upgrade their system if it's necessary, if they're trying to use a system in a manner that the system is not capable of being used. It should be upgraded. I think it's clear. We need the definition of failure, and I think that the Health Department's done a good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Norm. Paul.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I was hopeful that you would have taken out the owner must notify within 24 hours of a third pumping in 180 days. It managed to stay in there. What I would like you to do now is consider doing something else that will make it more unlikely that anybody would be unaware that they're pumping for a third time. The Health Department has records that show how often it's pumped. And those records, I believe, are for the Health Department's use only. But I would like to see if it couldn't be made, they couldn't be made to the pumping, available to the pumping professionals, so that when they get a call to pump a place, they can log on to the city's database. And I'm not talking about me being able to do it or the general public being able to do it, just the people who've already been through the process of being certified, able to certify a system, and check, has it been pumped in twice already within the last 6 months? And that, I'm told it would be relatively easy for you guys to offer that service, and if it's already available, I apologize for wasting your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. All right, Council. Laura.
Just to start with the last thing, could you answer or respond to what Paul just said about is that database open to the registered professionals?
Currently on our database, we're going through an upgrade right now to IWIMS. If council may have remembered about a year and a half ago, we appropriated funds to go to IWIMS 2, Integrated Wastewater Information Management System, IWIMS 2.0. That database hadn't been updated in about 12 years. So once that's online, what Paul is describing will be functional, and it may not operate exactly like Paul was describing, but it will operate, that will be noticed, and we'll send out a notification to the homeowner that their system was pumped 3 or more times in that 180-day period, and just kind of guide them. We'll also be reaching out to the pumping community and informing them of what their responsibility is and what they need to do.
Thank you. I also did want to respond to the first speaker. Thank you so much for coming. And I think all of us up here got many phone calls and many emails, and somehow we were all put on some website, then did a mass email or was using like Constant Contact or something like that to send out emails. And it was very distressing. And actually, I was able to respond to just some of the emails that I got from community members who all seemed to have the same, they all said the same thing in the same words. And when I emailed back and asked them exactly what their concerns were, and when I asked them for details to really understand what their concerns were, you're right, nobody had the correct information. There was a lot of misinformation out there. And I just really want to encourage people, because you brought it up, that when you hear about something that really is disconcerting or just doesn't seem like it makes sense, please contact our city manager, contact any one of us up here, and we will get you, if we don't know the information, we will get you to the right people. That's what we're here for. That's what our city staff is here for. That's our number one priority, is to serve our residents. So I really, because a lot of times things are, they just, wow, that doesn't make sense. And so rather than feel like you have to come to a city council, I mean, we always welcome you to a city council meeting, or sometimes people write letters to the editor and it's like, gee, I wish you had contacted somebody first. You might still have the same opinion, but at least you'll have more information. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I got a comment. Paul Grisandi brought something up about it, and we did discuss it last time when we had this thing up about the 24-hour thing, and somebody said, hey, you get the report on the 15th anyway, isn't that good enough? Won't you know at that point that you'll have 3 in 180 days, and is it really that vital, excuse me, to have the 24-hour notice? Can you talk about that at all? Because that was a good point. I think it got lost in the confusion last time.
But you did amend the ordinance, and it does say the property owner and or his agent or designee, and also the pumping company. So there's 3 different options. I would think that as a property owner, I would want to know what was going on and be notified about that. That is ultimately, I mean, I wouldn't want to rely on a pumping company to take care of my personal business, of my responsibility, legal responsibilities to the city. So it's just, as a property owner, you can delegate that authority, but you shouldn't just automatically, in my opinion, be giving or relying on somebody that you haven't authorized to have that authority. So it does say, it was amended, it does say the property owner or their designee or the pumping company who they designate to do that.
So if I get my thing pumped the 3rd time in 180 days and I'm talking to the pumping guy and he says, oh, no problem, I'll put in a report to the city, and he doesn't, then who's liable for being late?
Well, when the reports are turned in, you'll get a notification from the city that you just need to have that inspection. So the process will still work. It's just that it probably would take a little longer for that to finally come back to the property owner, because once we receive the findings from the pumping company that it's been pumped 3 or more times in that 180-day window, we're going to get the notification and we're going to send the notice out to the property owner.
Okay, thanks very much. And I got a bunch of these calls and a bunch of these emails yesterday, and you can always tell because when they're scripted and everyone says, I'm Joe Schmuckatelli, I've been in Malibu for 40 years, I'm a voter, and blah, 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 blah. So I actually called them all back, every one of them, yesterday. Not all the ones today, because I just got the tsunami overtook me today. But I actually called most of them back and spoke to a few of them. And when I just want to know, if you're going to call me, let me know what specifically is your problem with it? And I explained to him how it got whittled down. It's already been in front of the council two times already, and they were unaware of any of that information. And once I explained it to them, they were like, well, the ones I talked to said, that sounds like pretty good to me. I'd want to know that if my neighbors were, had a failed system. So there is a lot of disinformation out there, and I would, encourage everybody to find out the facts.
I got a lot of the same phone calls in Big Rock, and I tried to straighten out some of the misinformation. But basically, from my feeling, is that whatever misinformation is out there is our fault. People don't understand what's going on in the city. It's our responsibility to make sure that they know. I don't think it's everyone's responsibility to look up every single ordinance that we do. I think it's our responsibility in something like this. And there's been a lot of talk about this. And a lot of my neighbors, as one of them said, they were terrified. Whenever you mention septic tanks, you have an issue in Malibu. I mean, it's an issue because people don't understand. And if this is just a simple amendment, it wasn't explained that way. It became a cause, and that's why we got all the phone calls and all the emails, et cetera. We all got it. And maybe the fault is it hasn't been explained well enough for people to be happy with it. I mean, I can talk to a few people, Rick can talk to a few people, and Laura, but basically it's only a few people. We have a lot of people live in this town, and all of them are on septic tanks. And I think it's important for us to find a way to communicate with them before we start imposing more governmental regulations on them. That's my feeling. And the other question I have for you is that why was it so difficult to get a gray water system going? I thought gray water was something we were trying to promote in this town.
Well, I was hoping you would ask that question. It is really, it is state law to allow for gray water systems. It's in the plumbing code. The city does not deny anybody the opportunity to obtain a gray water permit. There are 3 types of gray water systems, and I think there may be some misconception about this from this gentleman about that. There's a laundry to landscape system that the state allows, and we do require a permit, but that permit is, council has voted to have that permit fee exempt. There is a simple system which allows gray water up to 250 gallons a day, and a complex system which has more than 250 gallons a day. So we do permit gray water systems. We do encourage gray water systems. Gray water systems are not meant to take the size of a septic system away. They're made to supplement them and reuse water appropriately. But if that water can't be reused, if it's a El Nino or raining a lot and you can't use gray water, your septic system does need to handle that amount of water regardless. So we encourage gray water systems. We have information on our website about how to obtain permits. And I would hope that gentleman would come and see me during regular business hours, and we'll see what we can do to get that. If he has a gray water system permitted, we're glad to do that. And in regards to Lou's first comment, I think we heard at the first council meeting about reaching out to people. We went the extra step to put it in the newspaper and a lot of other ways that we don't normally do for the subcommittee meeting, or for the wastewater advisory committee meeting, and we did a lot of outreach. We did additional outreach on the last council meeting that we don't normally do for agenda items or for ordinances. So I think we heard you the first time. We're trying to reach out. Unfortunately, just as I've heard tonight, a lot of people don't contact us and ask the questions. So it's hard to give the information if the question isn't asked, but we're certainly willing to do that. And I hear what you're saying, and we'll do our best to make sure that we get that out the best we can.
Go ahead, Laura.
I just wanted to ask, one of the gentlemen said the pumping, he said pumping 3 times is not necessarily indicative of a failed system. And I think the issue is that if you pump 3 or more times within a 6-month period, that then it needs to be, they need to contact the city so that we can see if it's a failed system, correct?
That's
Or
partly
there's a root there, or, roots are growing or something like that.
right. That's partly correct. If you pump 3 or more times in a 180-day period, you are required to have an inspection, and that inspection is performed by registered inspectors. Because one of the misconceptions that was out there is city staff comes on site and does the inspection. We do not go onto anybody's property as city staff. We've made that clear all along. You are simply having an inspection to identify if there is a problem that's creating the need to pump it 3 or more times. If it is a simple maintenance item, you mentioned roots in the system, it's in the D-box, in the leach field or something, and you remove those and the system is functional, you're done. You've maintained the system. But if the inspection report indicates that it has failed, then it is the report that indicates it's failed. It's not the fact that you pumped it 3 times.
Okay, and then, Lou, just to respond to what you said, communication and getting the word out has always been really important to me, but I think that when people purposefully put out misinformation, as we all know in our world these days, that is not the city's fault. If we're going to discuss item A and people decide, and I have no idea who did it, to develop a website and say they're about to, vote to have issue A imposed on every person, and every person on Malibu is going to have to pay $100,000, that's not the city's fault that we didn't get information out, because people are purposefully developing and putting out misinformation. So I think while I agree with you a lot of times, we can do a better job getting our information out. This was actually a situation where people took the information, distorted it, and then scared a lot of people.
But those weren't the calls I was getting. I wasn't getting it from that memo that went out with exactly the same language. I was getting it from people I know in my neighborhood. And those are the ones that were confused about what was going on. It had nothing to do with that. They heard septic tanks, and that's what scared them.
Make a motion to. I was going to say something. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you didn't want to.
So I was letting you guys go back and forth for a bit. So, Craig, I just wanted to have you be very clear for the public, because there's been a little bit of, some of the questions that I got were surrounding what is a failed system and whatnot. And the concern with that, and also referenced in the long legal letter that came from Manat Phelps from the company that Lauren works with. And there's a part of that that he referenced a letter from a professional in the field, and he talks about what a failed system is, and kind of has basically gives the argument that none of what we're saying is a failed system is actually a failed system, when the definition in the wastewater world of a failed system is a system that is dumping, is overflowing and leaching out into the road or the street or something like that. And I think that what you're getting at is that would be what would happen if it wasn't getting pumped all the time, but we don't want to create that to happen. So if you could just really elaborate on what is a failed system, just so that I'm very clear on that.
Well, primarily a failed system is the system's inability to percolate wastewater into the ground on an on-site wastewater system, but it is also a failed system if, let's just say, it's finding its way into the ground, but then contaminating the environment by the constituents that are in wastewater and violating both state and federal law. So a lot of times the fact that the water is just disappearing doesn't mean necessarily that a septic system is functioning properly. So a failed system is primarily in the disposal. If that area is failed and is not doing what its design intent of the system is, then that would be considered failed. The tank, if the tank was ruptured and leaking into the environment, that would be considered failed. Again, I want to point out that simply having 3 pumps in a 180-day period does not designate a system as being failed. It designates the system as needing inspection, and that inspection could determine that the system has failed. But the fact that it's 3 pumps is not.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. Does anyone have any other questions? A motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance number 421. Do I need to read the rest of it?
No.
Okay.
We already read it last time.
Okay, thank you.
I shall second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No.
Okay.
Motion
4 to
carries
1.
4-1 with Lamont.
All right, 3B7. Bob?
Yes, I'm here to answer any questions. If you want me to do a little presentation or?
Yeah, just give a, I mean, we have one public speaker, so did anyone pull it from up here or no?
No, I think it's the speaker.
Okay, John, let's go ahead.
There you go. Okay, I just want to quote Lou from 2 minutes ago about the public being informed on what is happening. On this item, you're starting the process of spending about a third or more of our grant money for making the highway safe. And it basically is repairing or refiguring medians that exist. I just drove by them. When you drive home, you'll find that the medians from Webway to Puerco are the only medians from there to the county line that actually are contiguous and exist. From there on is substandard medians or no medians, as is most of the area around Point Doom. Now, this is a third of our money to spend, and we don't seem to have a priority here. What's safer, PCH in front of Pepperdine or PCH in front of Dukes? Do we spend $7 million fixing a problem that's really a serious problem? Or do we put foliage in the middle of our road on medians that are already there? It's a priority thing. And I doubt if there's 10 people in Malibu that know that this is happening, other than staff. And I doubt if they realize that this is a finite amount of money we're spending to make the highway safe, and it's being spent on putting plants in the middle of the street. Now, you're going to argue, oh, plants are safer if they're in medians, et cetera, et cetera. The main thing is it worth a third of what we have to spend on making the highway safe to fix up medians that are already there? How about from Puerco to say Latigo? That's one of the most dangerous strips in the highway. There are no medians that are worth anything. People drive over them all the time. And then the other thing that you need to consider is I remember we're spending $50,000 a year taking care of the plants in the little tiny area we have by Legacy Park. Now, what is 2 miles going to cost you? And how long is that going to go on? 20 years, 50 years? Is it a couple $100,000 a year? I've never seen that anywhere, but it's part and parcel of this project. So I think you should step back and decide where that 20 million should go and where it should go, weighted by how safe it is, how more safe it makes the highway, not how pretty the highway looks. And you will be told, oh, it makes it safer. That's not the question. If the question is it worth $7 million, and can that money be spent somewhere else? And why rush now when there's been no exposure to the public? Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think Reva is going to address that.
Yes, I just wanted to touch on a few of the questions that Mr. Mazza brought up. All of the projects that we'll be spending our LA County Measure R money on were identified in the PCH safety study, and there was a priority list, and that's how we've been approaching as staff at tackling the list of high priority projects. The project before you does have a lot of safety features. It will aesthetically improve the look of the areas and the medians, which, as we know, don't look very good, but it'll also address width of the highway and safe zones where people cross, where we know there's issues without crosswalks. And what Mr. Mazza doesn't know, which is a really great part of one of his questions that I can answer, is that Caltrans is actually going to be doing a project at the same time that will go from where our project ends all the way to the bottom of Corral. So what we're trying to do is coordinate with Caltrans to do our project simultaneously so that there are coordinated efforts on basically the same project being paid for by two different sources of money. The other issue that Mr. Mazza brought up about the Rambla Las Flores area, that is also one of the highest priorities identified in the safety study. That project is going to be addressed and paid for all by Caltrans, not by the city. And I know that in our last meeting with them, they did say that they're getting close to start the design of that project, and it'll be something that there'll be extensive community outreach, which is what Mr. Brager and I requested from them at our last meeting. So we did provide an update on the LA County Measure R projects a few months ago to council, and we have it on the agenda for August 14th again to come back with an update, so the public will be able to know the list of upcoming projects at that time.
Anybody else?
Real quick, thank you, Reva, for the update. So as I understand it then, from your comments, that Caltrans will be doing the area in front of Seafood Emporium at Corral, headed up toward Latico, because that's a real tough area. Or Bob, did you want to address that one? Thanks.
Certainly, yes. Yeah, Caltrans is in the process currently. It's in the design works to go from Puerco to Corral Canyon, and to improve that section of the highway.
Bob, if I may ask, also the design of that, the median will be such to prevent, like a head-on collision as well?
That is correct. As you see, yeah, that's correct.
The other thing too that I wanted to add is that at least in our portion of the improvement project, we'll be able to use recycled water from the wastewater project to water that area if there is planting.
Also, one of the reasons that this was a high priority is all of the things that Reva said, and also we all know how bad the drainage is around there when we have a winter storm, and that there are a lot of studies that show when you have a planted medium that it is a traffic calming technique, so it does slow traffic down. So for all of those reasons, and especially the safety study. I know Lou and I worked on this when we were first looking at how to use Measure R funds, so.
I make a motion to approve 3B7.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
3B8. Professional Services Agreement with Freedom Media LLC. Malibu Surfside News. We have 3B8. Arnold York, followed by Mary Hogan.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I see that one of the things you did is you decided to appeal Measure R to the Supreme Court. And part of Measure R, an integral part of Measure R, is you didn't want national chains of a certain size coming into the town. Basically, it was a vote, among other things, for localism, to support your local community. So now you have the question of what to do with your illegals. And you put it out to bid. And the bids come in, and I think Surfside was a little lower than us, but not by much. And we have different ways of distributing. But fundamentally, Surfside at one time was a local paper. Ann Sobel was there. Ann and I were competitors for 20 years. Then it kind of went out of business, came back online. And at that time, Surfside was sort of a quasi-local. They had at least, the publisher owner was here in town, but it was produced by 22nd Century Media out of Chicago. Now we've gone the next step. Surfside is part of 22nd Media, and it's owned by a conglomerate out of Florida. They have between, according to their own statistics, somewhere between 100 and 500 million a year in revenue. We're approaching that, but not quite. And I think that if the only criterion you use is who can bring it in for the lowest price, there's no question that Walmart can undersell Ralph's. And I think that what you're doing is you're all for localism unless it costs you money. And then suddenly you change your criteria. Now, there's also a second part of this, and one of them is I know there's some concern to you, Skylar, that a lot of these are mailed directly into homes. We have different ways of distributing. We do 3,750, and Surfside does, I think the number was 6,000, something like that. We're a requester, which means people have asked for it. In fact, Surfside is in the process of trying to become a requester. That's why they have those forms, and the reason they want to, it's cheaper to be a requested publication than do the general circulation they do now. We're dealing, but that's only one kind of, Karen, can I have that file? That's only one criteria. They're rather matrices. You want people, really, you want your legal to be seen by people who engage in town. So let me give you some sense of where we are on this. We have, as you know, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we have a website, and fundamentally,
You can
almost every one of
give
those
him one more minute from
okay,
Karen.
every one of those categories. For example, let's give you an example. On Twitter, we have 5,922 followers. Surfside's got 1,055. On Facebook, we have 6,191 likes. Surfside's got 664. In Instagram, they don't have anything. We've got 3,500 people. We put out a daily newsletter. Now, your legal, and also our legals are also online because when we put them up, they're up electronically in the electronic edition, so you can read them online. But fundamentally, that tells you who's engaged and who's reading it. And I think I would ask you to rethink what you were thinking about and award it to the Malibu Times.
Thank you, Arnold. Mary?
Hi. On behalf of Malibu Surfside News, we wanted to thank you for the recommendation for the legal notices and extend to you again our commitment that we would be publishing on Thursdays. I'd like to address, though, some of the things that we've just heard and answer any questions. First of all, we are a requester paper. We have over 70% of the residents requesting us. The word requester is just used because you could get it's a status where you get a periodical status with the post office, and that helps us control our postage expenses. I'm really not going to address Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Our focus is on the paper, and that's where your legal notices would appear. Our ownership, Freedom Media LLC, is owned by 22nd Century Media, and I think everybody or most people know our founder is a resident here of Malibu. If I can answer any questions, I'd be happy to do so.
All right, does anybody have any questions? Not of her. Does anybody have any questions of Arnold? No. Does anyone have any questions of staff?
I have a question.
Thank you, Mary.
Of staff, I guess of Riva, or whoever is making this decision. Is it possible to share these notices?
Heather, do you want to go ahead and answer that?
I mean, can we do half in one paper and half in another? Is that a possibility?
I think Christy has an answer.
I wouldn't mind if you did both, but I wouldn't want you to split it, which I know would double your budget. But I wouldn't want you to split it in half because arguably it would confuse the public not to know where to find. I mean, the important thing is that we have a posting place that people can count on and they can always go to. So it doesn't matter to me if you do more noticing, but splitting it up I think would create a problem for confusion. People not knowing where to look this month or every other month, or you know what I'm saying? Sorry.
Okay.
Was there a history, because I didn't see a history of which paper had it for how long and what determined when Arnold's paper took it, when the Malibu Times took it. I didn't know. Surfside News ended, and is there kind of a timeline on that for a reference for history for some of us?
I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I know that the Surfside News had our contract up until they had a lapse in being able to publish for a time, and that's when we had to move over to the Malibu Times because that was the only paper that could publish legal notices in the city for a while. And then through RFPs, we've just continued with the Times until your decision tonight.
Go ahead, Arnold.
When the Surfside folded, at that point, we went to the city and said, we'll continue to publish on whatever you were paying Surfside. And we did, and then it went out after whatever the period of time it was, and it was rebid. Now, I don't remember at that point whether the new Surfside had started up, but there was a new contract that went on for, as I recall, 3 years. And it's now ending, and that's why it's up for rebid.
Okay. Laura?
You know, I appreciate both sides coming, and I know that certainly one of the things that we are tasked with is being fiscally prudent, and so I think that that's really important, and that kind of gives it a little push to the Surfside News. But I am also very aware of what Arnold said about kind of walking the walk, not just talking the talk about localism. And I also think it's funny, I guess when people talk about, oh, I read something in the newspaper, I usually hear I read it in the Times. And if you look at the number of letters to the editor, it's usually many more in the Malibu Times, which it's a very unscientific way of looking at anything. Or you look at the classifieds, that would tell me that more people are actually reading the Times. Both of the newspapers, the Surfside actually does a good job of, you can just get the whole newspaper online. You can turn the pages, which is very helpful. And so I just wanted to bring up those issues because I think that they're relevant to our decision.
You can do the same thing with the Malibu Times. Turn the pages online.
I see, Mary, did you have a question or something to say? Because we gave Arnold an extra minute, and it seems that
Thank you. It's just a quick comment, and I should have corrected it earlier, but just listening and hearing Laura, you're saying to walk the talk. One thing I just want to, again, say is our founder, when we took over the paper, the Surfside was out of business for 2 months, and brought the paper back to the community. And I think people have really appreciated that. I think people have supported both papers, definitely. But one of the things, though, really, I do want to correct from what I heard earlier is this is not part of a company that's making $100 to $500 million. I'd really like a nice paycheck from a company like that, but it's really not. I don't know where those numbers came from. We're here, we report the news, we work with the local businesses, and you know, we'd appreciate the opportunity to provide you a cost-efficient means with our paper.
Where is your office now? Because I know that you left the Point Dume office, I think. So where are the offices now?
It was over on Canaan, and I think most people know, but we did close the office. We closed it last summer. And really, staff was out more than in, and rents were high. Our lease was up. We inherited the lease from the old Surfside paper. And we work pretty much virtually, as many people do, or other publications, even in the magazine community that serves this area. Okay.
So I imagine that my comment to my other council members was that without an office, your costs are lower. So you don't have to maintain a physical office, where the Malibu Times maintains a physical office, so their costs are higher.
I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion to approve item 3B8 and approve the staff's recommendation.
Okay, I'll second it.
Let's go to roll call.
Mayor Pro Tem Mullen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wagner,
Yes.
Councilmember Lamont,
No.
Councilmember Rosenthal,
No.
Mayor Peak,
Yes.
motion carries.
Three B9. Funding for additional weed removal.
Staff report is in front of you. Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. The staff report's in front of you. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. We're requesting additional funding to deal with the significant weeding issue at Legacy Park. Due to the heavy rain and a couple other factors, we have the park has become heavily inundated with weeds, and we would like the additional funding to, number one, have Brightview take care of some additional weeding, which would give us about a month or so to hire 2 part-time staff, which is where the additional funding comes in of $14,000. We'd have 2 part-time staff that would be dedicated to weeding at Legacy Park. And then what we would do, and that would give us time to complete the earth-friendly management policy and bring the Brightview contract back for your approval later in the year.
Go ahead, Laura.
Why wasn't this included in the budget?
That's a great question. I think that we have heard the issues with the park and having significant problems with weeds, and we'd hoped that we'd be able to take care of them, and we found that they've gone to seed now, and so what's happened is we're just finding that the problem is much worse than we initially anticipated or thought it was going to be. So that's the reason it wasn't included in the funding. But also, Brightview's still working under their current contract, and that current contract is basically not to exceed $185,000 a year. An updated contract, which is what we'll bring to you later this year, will probably go over that significantly from what we expect and what we've seen from the bids. So we want to bring that with the earth-friendly management policy because those are tied together. They're so, I mean, literally the bid and the amount of the bid is based on our policies, which have been no pesticides and no trapping and items like that. So we're waiting to do that, but as you know, the earth-friendly management policy is with a consultant right now. It's a pretty aggressive timeline we've set of 3 months roughly to get it taken care of. We're about a third of the way through that right now, and even if we were to complete it within the next 2 to 3 months, it's going to take us that long to catch back up with weeds and to get that to best case scenario.
So of that 180,000 with Brightview, do you know how much of that is for Legacy Park? Or is that all for Legacy Park? Or is that for all of our
It's not all
parks?
for Legacy Park. That's for Bluffs, Las Flores, Trancas, and Legacy Park, as well as 4 medians in the city. I can't put a ballpark on it, but I will say that under the current contract that Brightview's working with, when they signed that agreement, they were allowed the use of pesticides, and that's not a negative. It just is what it is. That they've continued to work under their old contract with some pretty heavy restrictions. So they've given us extra manpower or woman power, and they've worked with us in every way, shape that they can to keep up with the contract. But it's a struggle. In some cases, they've had to double the amount of people they've had at a park to hand pull or use weed whip, weed whacking to take care of those issues. So they're doing what they can do. This additional funding would help us move towards the direction of getting the park squared away until we could bring the new contract and the earth-friendly management policy back to council.
Thank you. Reva, I know that the cost for Legacy Park was $25 million, including all the grants and all that when we bought it. Somebody happened to mention that Legacy Park altogether cost $50 million.
That's not correct.
Okay, and also somebody, you know, there's some information going out there about how left a lever on, and that's why there was saltwater intrusion those years ago, a staff member, and that we're spending, I think, around $115,000 a year on Legacy Park. So I just wanted to ask a couple of those questions. Those were just some of the numbers I remember reading. Just to, again, when people read things, to question, because I was like, wow, I didn't think we spent $50 million. So I actually asked the question. So don't always believe what you read on social media, I guess.
Did you want me to clarify that for you? Or so we did not spend $50 million. We spent $25 million on the acquisition of the property, which included the 3 commercial properties, the Malibu Lumberyard site, the Animal Coast Hospital site, and the Super Care Malibu Medical site, and the park. So it was all of those properties were included in the acquisition. And then we spent $10 million on the improvements to Legacy Park, most of which were grant funded. So that was not $50 million. I'm not aware of a lever that was left on. We do have a very high salt content in the soil, which is just caused by the groundwater and the fact that there is a liner in the pond, which prohibits proper drainage completely of the water on the park. And it's something that staff has been working very diligently to get a handle on, including replacing plants with plants that do better with a higher salt content. So it's something we are working towards getting. And then I just wanted to clarify, because make sure everybody understood when Jesse said that the original contract with Brightview did allow for the use of pesticides, but they have been instructed to no longer use pesticides, and that has not been happening. So the reason the costs have gone up is because they are had to change the methods that they're using for their maintenance for us. So I just wanted to clarify that.
I'll make a motion to approve the, well, we can discuss it. I'm just going to make a motion to approve the additional funding of $27,000.
I'll second it.
Just have a couple quick questions for Reva. So I got many of the same emails and statements that you did receive, and I was just curious if there's any fact that, is there a saltwater system in Legacy Park that somebody could have left a valve on, just to be specific? Because I wasn't aware of it, and I worked on the park's development. So if there is an issue with saltwater intrusion, it wouldn't be coming through the underlayment at the pond, and it wouldn't be going above a water table that's already there, a fresh water that comes downhill into the saltwater. So we're talking about fresh water migrating that we've treated, and it hits saltwater at a certain point. So the root structures that are there are impacted only if they go very deep into saltwater. Is that, maybe I'm
going to ask one of my staff
Jesse.
members
Yeah.
to answer, but
Okay.
I am not aware of a valve or a lever that has caused the salt problem. This is something that we've been dealing with for probably 4 or 5 years now. What my understanding is that the main problem is that there's a liner under the pond which prohibits proper flow of fresh water to mix with the groundwater that would naturally dilute the salt water.
That's what I was trying to get out there to the public so that they had a better understanding. One other statement that I received in an email said that plants were improperly put in certain areas, so there were shade necessary plants that were not planted in the shade, and root bound in tree. Yes, so there's a lot out there. Maybe if next council meeting in a month, we could come up with just some general ways that our park runs so that we can clarify these things, because it kind of got out there and it became what I felt pretty ugly, and I had some understandings myself, and I knew some of these things were not fair statements. So if we could clarify that, have Jesse maybe come up with just a general quick one-pager, Jesse, that says if the fresh water can't get down through the membrane, it can't dilute the salt water. If a shade plant was put improperly in a sunny area, that we can fix that. Are you see where I'm headed?
Absolutely, and we'll be happy to provide that update. And I just want to, remind the council, I know you know this, but as with any new park, there's always a failure of certain plants and overgrowth of others, and there's always a balancing act. It's a complicated ecosystem that we put in because of the different habitat areas, and so there is a balancing act of finding what works and what doesn't, and that's all part of the management of the park. Fortunately, I think we have excellent professionals who know what they're doing, and we will bring back an update for you on the conditions.
And thank you. And could you also, in that, Jesse, explore the steam machines? I know you're familiar with them, and the fact that they do that, the 700 model at 10 grand is pretty efficient. If you can get the wand back, 20, 30 feet from the DG walkways, you can do a pretty good job. One guy can cover a couple of acres in a day.
Yep,
So-
we've taken a look at those. I know we've gotten some of that information from people from the general public, and
Yeah.
it's a cool machine. It's definitely something we've looked into, but I'll definitely include that in the report.
I appreciate it. Thanks very much.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, 4A. Four A is continued, 4B is continued, and we are going to be moving to 4C.
Actually, I had a comment on 4B earlier. I
Oh,
mentioned
sorry,
it.
go
Yeah.
back to 4B.
So I guess this is for Bonnie. On 4B, the appellant had indicated that he couldn't make it. He came to my retail store and was trying to convince me that he needed time and he wouldn't be here. I was just wondering if Sean Weber approached the planning staff or your offices and why he was given the extra time, because this has been on subject for some time, and it's been a disappointment for many people in the community about the retail activities occurring on PCH in front of the Malibu Pier. Thank you, Bonnie.
I believe it was his representative that reached out to planning staff and indicated that his client, Mr. Weber, would not be available had a conflict with this hearing date, and the city attorney's advice was that it puts an appellant at a disadvantage if he's not able to appear in person. So, and it's been consistent council practice to show a little latitude where an appellant or an applicant, depending on the circumstances, can't make it. Certainly when there's a pattern of over and over again, you begin to suspect there's something else going on. So it was our recommendation just to provide this additional time just in this one instance.
Okay, thank you, Bonnie. I just want to let the council know that at 2:55 p.m. this afternoon, on my way to a meeting here at City Hall, I saw Sean Weber wearing a gray Surf Shack t-shirt with a blue hat turned around and shorts and tennis shoes climbing into one of his trucks. So if I find out that he used "I can't be available" and he was at work today, I am going to be really disappointed, and I'm going to make that a well-known fact in this community. Okay? Now I'm going to add something else to this. I did a little research to help staff out on vehicle code 22507.5. I'll give it to you after the meeting so I don't bore the public with it, but it's a detail of how Caltrans is allowing us to put the signs up. And I hope Mr. Weber is watching. The city took the easy route, giving 2 hours as a latitude time for him to move the trailers and then reinstall them, because that's what's going to happen. Caltrans, in paragraph 2, says you can do it from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. I'm reading it printed from Caltrans. So when it comes back, I'm going for the longer term, and I hope I can find a council consensus. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jefferson. So we will be continuing item 4B to the August 14th regular city council meeting. We're now at 4C, which is Appeal 17-001. don't. I think we're gonna starting with a short staff report.
Mayor, members of the council, the matter is an appeal of a coastal development permit for a single-family residence with accessory development at 28405 Via Cerro. The application was considered by the City Council at its May 22nd, 2017 regular meeting, and the council continued the item to allow the project to be redesigned such that the main residence would not exceed 18 feet in height, and the square footage of the main residence would be reduced in area, and to allow a solar study to be conducted by an expert to demonstrate the project's shading effect on neighboring properties. Here's an aerial photograph and vicinity map of the project site. The subject parcel is located toward the end of Via Cerro. The subject parcel consists of steep slopes, which are typical of the area, and surrounding properties consist of residential development and undeveloped properties. Canaan Road is an identified scenic road located approximately 550 feet to the west of the subject site. With regards to the appeal, the grounds for the appeal are that the Planning Commission's approval was not appropriately supported by the required findings, not supported by substantial evidence and contrary to law, and that the proposed project does not comply with the LCP. The primary issue of the appeal focuses on LCP and MMC findings relating to solar access, project alternatives, neighborhood character, public view impacts, and grading and landform alterations. The proposed project has changed since the last time it was reported to the council. The applicant submitted revised plans on June 13th of this year with a proposed main residence not to exceed 18 feet in height. The residence is now 4,016 square feet with an attached 658 square foot garage for a total of 4,674 square feet in area. The project still includes a detached second residential unit, but has been reduced significantly from 900 square feet to 668 square feet. Although the site plan review for height is no longer necessary, the project is still sited in the same location and on the same pad as previously designed, and as a result of that, the site plan review for construction on steep slopes, steeper than 3:1, is still necessary for the project. The project site is allowed a maximum total development square footage of 6,279 square feet, as required by hillside development standards. These standards require a 25% reduction of the maximum total development square footage allowed on the site. The project before the council at the May 22nd meeting demonstrated a 5,379 square foot residence and 900 square foot second residential unit for a total development square footage of 6,279. The project has since been revised, and the total development square footage totals 5,342 square feet. This includes the proposed residence, the attached garage, second residential unit. The total development square footage has been reduced significantly, more than the 25% that's required by hillside standards. This proposed project has reduced the total TDSF by 37%. The applicant accomplished this by reducing 292 square feet from the lower level and 728 square feet from the main level. Furthermore, the revised plans demonstrate that the complete removal of the previously proposed upper level to further meet the reduction to the total development square footage for the main residence. Here's the site plan of the proposed project. As previously mentioned, the project is sited in the same location and on the same pad design as previously proposed. The area in red here demonstrates a development boundary, which is within the northern portion of the parcel, which is separated by Via Cerro. The site plan demonstrates the 4,016 square foot main residence with an attached 658 square foot garage and 668 square foot second residential unit. That's the area demonstrated in green there. The driveway access and fire turnaround is provided along Via Cerro on the western portion of the site. The revised project conforms to the development standards contained within the local coastal program and hillside development standards and all the requirements of the municipal code, inclusive of the proposed changes. Here's the previous elevation for the proposed project. The applicant previously requested a site plan review to construct portions of the residence in excess of 18 feet in height, with a maximum height of 28 feet for a pitched roof. The project plans have since been revised since the May 22nd City Council meeting, and the new design does not exceed 18 feet in height. Here are the current proposed elevations for the single-family residence. The building has been modified by removing the previously proposed upper level and dropping the top of roof elevation to a height not to exceed 18 feet. The proposed project as currently designed would further support the intent of the hillside standards and further reduce any potential visual impacts from cane and dune. Story poles were reinstalled on the site in June of 2017 to more accurately reflect the reduction in the square footage and the height due to the maximum height of 18 feet limitations. The area in red here indicates the 18-foot height limit. Here's the southern elevation. This is facing towards the Pacific Ocean off of Via Cerro. You have the garage, and then you have beyond the garage, you have the upper level, the main entry level, and then below it you have the lower level. Again, the project doesn't exceed 18 feet in height and does not exceed the 35-foot maximum height limit per the hillside standards. The overall height has been reduced specifically within the portion of the building where the upper level was previously proposed. The hillside standards require structures not to exceed a maximum height of 35 feet from the lowest to the highest point of the structure. The highest elevation of the revised project is now 524 feet, where the project previously presented to City Council on May 22nd was at 531. That's a 7-foot drop. The overall height of the structure is now at 27.5 feet and therefore complies with the maximum height limitation of 35 due to the hillside standards. And this demonstration here, this cross-section here demonstrates that. As shown in blue, the blue line demonstrates a 35-foot maximum height limitation from the lowest point at 496, which is the finished floor, to the highest point at 524 to the top of the roof. And the arrow in green demonstrates the 18-foot height from Via Cerro Street, the finished grade. Staff did visit the site after the story poles were reinstalled. While visible from Cane and Dune Road, the location of the proposed construction is within the area of existing development and is cited to be located as far downslope from Via Cerro Street as possible without impacting slopes and the required setbacks. Additionally, the overall TDSF of the project has been significantly reduced and the structures will be at a maximum height of 18 feet. The changes to the project further reinforce the findings made by the Planning Commission that the project is consistent with the LCP and does not result in adverse scenic or visual impacts from Cane and Dune Road. Furthermore, with the implementation of conditions of approval for the project, staff has determined that it will not have significant adverse scenic or visual impacts. Here are the story poles, as you can see from Cane and Dune Road, looking south towards the Pacific Ocean. As the story poles demonstrate, the structure is not highly visible from Cane and Dune Road, and the appellant's residence to the east of that is at a lower elevation. Regarding solar access on the site, since the project is a coastal development permit, a finding that the project does not affect solar access is not required. However, as directed by the council, staff obtained a third-party solar study to evaluate the project's shading effects. As illustrated by this photograph here, the appellant's residence is located approximately 165 feet to the east of the project site. The residence has solar panels mounted on top of the two-story structure. The appellant contends that the proposed project will impact solar access on its property. The solar shade study was prepared by VisFX Incorporated and considered the location, topography, massing, and structure height to determine shadows resulting from the proposed project. The solar shade study looked at the times between 9 a.m., noon, and 3 p.m. These times are the industry standard for solar shade studies, as they address the hours when the sun is highest in the sky and provides the most solar power for renewable energy systems. Here's the conclusions of the solar shade study. They demonstrated that the proposed project would not cast shadows beyond the site boundaries and therefore would not impact the appellant or other neighboring residents' solar access. The study acknowledges that the proposed structure may have the potential to cast shadows beyond the limits of the site prior to 9 a.m. and after 3 p.m. during the summer months when the sun approaches the horizon. However, the duration of these shadows are typically minutes or seconds, and solar access impacts on solar energy collection, if any, would be minimal. Here, as you can see on the legend, the area in yellow demonstrates the 3 p.m. Shade that would be cast by the proposed structure. I provided the site boundaries on the picture to the right to demonstrate that the yellow shading would not be cast beyond the property boundaries or affect the property to the east, the appellant's property. Here are other results of the solar shade studies, different times of the year, used to demonstrate the shadows that would be cast by the proposed residents at 18 feet in height. Again, these these show that the shadows cast by the 18-foot structure would not go beyond the site boundaries. The current design of the project complies with the LCP and reflects a substantial reduction in the building height and the TDSF compared to the project approved by the Planning Commission. The project has been reviewed and conditionally approved for conformance with the LCP by the Planning Department, staff, and appropriate city and county departments. The project complies with all applicable LCP and municipal code provisions and are supported by the substantial evidence in the record. Staff recommends that the City Council adopt a resolution denying the appeal and approve CDP 15-026, subject to the conditions of approval contained in the resolution. That concludes staff's presentation. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. So we have the appellant and the applicant and a handful of speaker slips on each. I guess we're going to start with the appellant. And then Beatrice, how much time do you guys want to reserve? So we're going to go appellant, then applicant, then the other public speakers, and then we're going to come back for your rebuttal time. So you want to use 10 minutes right now? Yeah. Okay. I mean, if I use less than like correct. Correct. And I might need a little refresher tutorial on how to use it. Pointer.
I don't see the pointer. Okay. Does anyone know how to use the pointer on this thing?
Somebody show her how to use it.
But I'm moving the frames, but I don't see a pointer. Do you see a red pointer? I don't see it.
You want the red laser?
Yeah.
I think it's this one.
Yeah, let's do it. Oh, there we go. I was just waving around too fast. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Bonnie.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Thank you for hearing my appeal on this project this evening. I would like to start out by thanking the City Council for help in reducing the height of the proposed project and the applicant for complying with the height reduction. At the 18-foot height, the new design is not only no longer casting shade across our house in the late afternoon hours of spring and fall, but it is also no longer jutting above the ridgeline of the hill behind it as viewed from the public view site from Cannon Road. Furthermore, the applicant has a stepped, effectively two-story design. He definitely came up with a win-win solution in this respect. Thank you very much. However, there are still some areas of concern, and I want to reiterate the points I've been talking about all along. Let's skip down to number 3, the repair of Via Cerro prior to the commencement of construction. The heavy equipment that was brought up to do the geological studies and well drilling crushed the road. Oh, what happened? And with the heavy rain this winter, the asphalt came up under the subsequent normal use of the road. Experience with prior developments shows that this will further deteriorate under the stress of construction traffic and will become impassable to anything but a truck unless it is fixed prior to the commencement of construction. Next issue is please continue the safeguards to the native California walnut tree specified in the February 6, 2017 Planning Commission approval. This is the motion the staff just went over. I want to go over the third one. The required applicant to redesign the project to not exceed 18 feet in height and reduce the square footage of the project to between 4,000 and 4,500 square feet, excluding the garage, to be more in line with the neighborhood character. And I think neighborhood standard is a more appropriate term in this case. Verbal guidance per Mayor Peak during discussion was to keep the size close to 4,000 square feet. The current total design square footage is 4,684 square feet, excluding the square footage of the garage, attached garage, by the way, making it the third largest house on the third smallest lot out of 12 developed properties on the street. It remains 50, the green over there is the average, the red is the proposed project. It remains 50% larger than the average size house on Via Acero, and it retains its guest house, which only 2 other homes on the street have, and it's 2-story. The final and most important aspect of the project is how it proposes to build its foundation in this landslide-prone area. The city is mandated per the LIP to minimize risks to life and property within the city. LIP 9.2 hazards. The city of Malibu and the Santa Monica Mountains coastal zone contains areas subject to hazards that present substantial risks to life and property. These areas require additional development controls to minimize risks and include, but shall not be limited to, the following: low slope stability and or high potential for landslide, rockfall, or debris flow, and hillside areas that have the potential to slide, fail, or collapse. Some areas potentially subject to earthquake-induced landslides are identified on the official seismic hazard zone maps released by the California Geological Survey, but areas not shown on these maps may also be subject to earthquake-induced landslides. So I have firsthand knowledge of 2 landslides that happened in areas contiguous to the subject property, and here's my layperson's drawing of where the landslides occurred. Okay, so the dotted line is the proposed project. No landslides happened there. The one on the lower left is Canaan. The red area is where the landslide started. The yellow is where it went and what it took to shore it up. Same thing up by our property. Small area actually slid, but where it went was big. It went far down the hill. And my little dotted line there is where a flow would probably go based on the shape and steepness of the subject property's hill. Here is another view that shows, more clearly shows how the subject property is lined up with our house and the existing slide in a straight line descending the hill. I believe that there is a potential for a slide on the subject property if the grading is handled in the way proposed, and that not only my parents' house, Mr. Lashgari, come on, that are not, okay, and that not only my parents' house is at risk, but their very lives are at risk because these slides happen suddenly and unexpectedly. I decided to research this issue on my own, and after reading an article in the LA Times discussing the types of landslides that occur in Southern California, I contacted the U.S. Geological Survey geologist that was quoted in the article to ask about any research into landslide triggers. I was put in touch with their landslide expert, William Schultz. He emailed me the following 2 drawings. Based on just an observation of the topography from satellite maps, he saw 2 landslides. The image on the left shows an ancient landslide, and the image on the right is a landslide that occurred on my parents' property that was also characterized as ancient prior to development, until it was remediated with removal and recompaction, and then it proceeded to slide after that. Please note that the landslides that have occurred recently on Canaan and on my parents' property were both remediated with R&R grading. The untouched ancient landslide has not budged in the 45 years my parents have been in the neighborhood. Please also note that the area where the landslide started are relatively small compared to the area where they flowed and the area required to successfully shore them up. Mr. Schultz directed me to an article I sent to all the council members in my letter last week, written by Dr. David Montgomery, PhD. His background is listed here. He has published over 200 articles, and the cited research was published in AGU, which publishes 20 highly respected peer-reviewed journals. So he's a PhD from, his Bachelor of Science is from Stanford, and his PhD is from Berkeley. And he was talking about a big landslide that happened in Washington, so he's an expert. The subject property has several geological engineering and soils engineer studies done and were available to the public prior to the applicant purchasing the property. This first geology report is dated 1987. It cites 2 approaches to the foundation design cited by the applicant's geologist as well, over excavation and recompaction or deepening foundations into bedrock. It points out that the foundation to bedrock is a more expensive approach, but it is associated with lower risk, and since the bedrock is relatively shallow, 7 to 15 feet down, the expense differential should be minor. The next report done, dated 1994, only recommends that the dwelling be supported by cast-in-place friction piles that penetrate a minimum of 10 feet into fresh bedrock. That's the unweathered bedrock. The next slide is dated, the report is dated 1995, and it also recommends cast-in-place caissons or piles to support the development. And this is the applicant's own geologist in a letter dated June 24th, 2016, recommending 2 options: the over-excavation and recompaction approach or the deepened foundation elements approach. And he writes that it is our understanding that the complete removal and recompaction of this unsuitable geologic materials is proposed beneath the building pad of the subject property. He is not saying he recommends it, and furthermore, his report contains 3 to 4 pages of disclaimers absolving him from any responsibility should the grading not perform as described. We are concerned that the proposed foundation design will not mitigate any landslide possibility, but will actually trigger a landslide, putting our home and our very lives at risk. The request for cast-in-place caissons or friction piles to support not only the guest house and the pool, which is how it's stated in the current geology report, but also the main house as well. This condition for approval is not living in fear of an imagined threat. It is a reasonable and informed request of the city to require risk minimization in the same spirit as earthquake retrofit against potential earthquake damage or brush clearance against potential fire hazard. This request is within the bounds of the city's authority to protect the private and public health and safety of its inhabitants. I beg you to please make this a condition. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Beatrice. Dawn, are you going to speak? How much time do you want to?
I'd love to speak. 15 minutes, and I'd like to retain 5 minutes for rebuttal, seeing as you got a lot of speaker slips. So, for the record, my name is Don Schmidt, and before we start, can we get our PowerPoint up, please? So, again, for the record, my name is Don Schmitz. I'm here on behalf of the applicant. I will try and keep it brief and to the point. You've seen this before. The revised project description, the house has been reduced down to 4,016 feet. It's 18 feet tall, single-family residence with a 658 square foot attached 2-car garage, and the second unit has been reduced down to 668 square feet. The project is an 18-foot tall house. It is a by-right house. There's no more concern or analysis really required here in regards to potential impacts to Cane and Dune. We appreciate the accolades of the appellant in regards to the reductions in the house. As you can see from the other direction, looking down, you'll be able to see one corner of the house which sticks out past the project that has already been approved by the city and should be under construction soon. The project has received multiple approvals from every department in the city of Malibu, including environmental health and geotechnical review, and I'll certainly be embellishing upon that in a moment. In February 6, 2017, your Planning Commission, in their appropriate role as the commissioners, approved a project. That project was for almost a 5,000 square foot house with a 446 square foot attached two-car garage and a 900 square foot second dwelling unit. It was my client's dream. It was a Tudor-style house. It was 25 feet plus in height, as measured by the hillside management practices. It was 35 feet, which is in compliance with the city code. When it was brought before you on May 22nd, he had unilaterally, to try and garner favor with the appellant, he had reduced the scope of the project, and he had cut down the majority of the home to 18 foot, still retaining a portion of the project to try and maintain the Tudor feel of the architecture. As you can see here, now the overall height under the hillside management was 28 foot, 18 foot in the back. This is what was before you last time. Today, I have a PowerPoint which is freezing up in an extremely frustrating manner while the clock runs. There we go. I'm going to move really quickly here. This is some really cool animation that I'm not going to show you in regards to the solar study because it's going to eat up a lot of time. And on our latest correspondent, the appellant has acquiesced the fact that there will be no shading on her property. Not that it matters pursuant to code, because it's an 18-foot by right house, it's beside the point. But you tasked us to do that. We spent the $4,500 check that we gave to the city, and your regional and your staff processed the application and the study. There will be no solar access impacts as defined by the staff. So before you today, we've revised the project down further again. It's now a 4,016 square foot house. It has a 658 two-car garage and 668 reduced second unit. The entire house now has been completely redesigned. It's a mid-century contemporary style house. It hurts, but the client wanted to work with you, and the applicant wanted to work with the neighbor in regards to reducing the scope and scale of this project. As you can see by this cross-section here, it's a dramatic reduction. It's 18 foot all across the planning plane of the site plan. So you can see the reductions here as we've been moving forward in both height and size of the overall project. Now this is an oblique aerial photograph of the neighborhood, which is sometimes subjective in regards to how you define it. Here you got 28305 Via Cerro. That's a 7,384 square foot house at 28 feet in height. You have the appellant's house at 3,561 square foot at 30 feet in height. You have 28460 Via Cerro, a 7,400 square foot house at 28 feet in height. Then you have, the arrows don't work, but down below the photograph, you've got a smaller house at 28296 Via Cerro, which is 1,185 square foot, still at 25 feet in height. And then you have the house, which wasn't built yet, which is right next door, that's been approved at 8,000 square foot and 28 foot in height. So what was originally approved was 4,933 square foot with a height of 35 feet as measured under the hillside standards. We reduced it in May, which was before you, cutting it down in height. And what is before you tonight is now a 4,016 square foot house, 18 feet. We will be the only 18-foot tall house in this neighborhood. So let's talk a little bit about the statistics. Now, one of the things that was a point of some very interesting discussion before was neighborhood standards. And you heard the appellant. She just said she still thinks that you ought to apply neighborhood standards. Well, the staff report goes into this in very great detail, and correctly so states neighborhood standards don't apply. What neighborhood standards is 17.40.040 and 17.62.040. That's an application that you make to have a bigger house, reduce setbacks, more grading, where you want to do something more than what the code allows. And to do that, you have to be consistent with a radius of 500 feet from the building site. And to even begin to contemplate this, you must have 10 developed properties. As you can see, there's only 5 building sites within 500 feet. So not only doesn't it apply by code, you couldn't apply it even if you wanted to. But let's go through this exercise. You can see taking those 5 projects, including Councilman Mullen, one that has not been built yet. But if you take those 5, the average square footage within that 500-foot radius is 5,514 square feet. Well, one of you might say, or some of you might say, well, you're not supposed to use one that hasn't been developed yet. Well, you're not supposed to use this code at all unless you've got 10 or more and you're asking for more. But let's go through this exercise. So let's take off the last one at 28465, which has been approved but not been built yet. And let's also take off 28296 Via Cerro, 1185 Via Cerro, because under the neighborhood standards, you're supposed to take off the smallest statistical anomaly and the largest statistical anomaly. And if you were to do that, the average size home in this neighborhood would be 6,115 square foot. So the bottom line, council members, is any way you shake it, even if somehow you were to, and I would say bluntly, misapply neighborhood standards, but use that sort of as a tool to define community character, we are right in there and in fact have the shortest house out there. Now, I'm going to move quickly on this because previous letters that the appellant had put out there called into question that there would be daylighting effluent. I've seen nothing in regards to their most recent correspondence, and they've not brought it up. I would just point out to you there will be no daylighting effluent, and your health department has looked at it very carefully. So then we come to the issue of the geology and soils. You are presented with a letter, an email from an academic who looked at an aerial photograph. And by the way, did you look carefully at the exhibit that was shown to you? He identified from an aerial photograph a landslide that's not on the property. What has happened on the subject property is that there has been multiple borings. We have our geologists here to answer any questions that you may have. The city geologist is here to answer any questions that you may have. On the latest report, there's been 9 borings, subsurface exploration. There is no landslide, ancient or otherwise, on this property. Removal and recompaction is a standard operating procedure in the city of Malibu and the county of Los Angeles. I don't know how many that the city has approved, and not a one of them has ever failed in the history of the city. Not ever. Nor have I been involved with one that has failed using removal and recompaction. It's just an industry standard. No offense, but you're not qualified, and I'm not qualified to opine upon this, and contacting somebody referenced in a newspaper article is not a basis for review. But let's take a look at what we're actually dealing with out there. The appellants use their property as some sort of precedent. Now you can see our proposed building site, and you can see their house, and you can see how the property drops steeply away. And yes, they had a mapped landslide, ancient landslide, below their house, right below their house. Now take a close look at this. You can see the area of the failure below their property, but look a little bit more carefully at the way that the topography works. Look where all the water goes. It flows right down to the lower portion of their property, and unless they manage their drainage properly, supersaturates the area of the historical landslide. This is hardly a basis to affirm at any level that there is a flaw in regards to the approval by the City of Malibu geotechnical reviewers that removal and recompaction is appropriate. So with that, I want to wrap up and retain the remainder of our time for rebuttal. But I do want to urge you to please speak to your geotechnical consultants and ask Mr. Holt to opine. In fact, Jake, could you come up here real quickly? We've got a whopping 30 seconds, but just tell them briefly what it is you do.
Leaving much time.
Please.
Hello, council members. My name is Jake Holt, Land Phases Incorporated out of Simi Valley. I'm the project engineering geologist for the project before you. Just real quick, I'm a state of California licensed professional geologist, a certified engineering geologist, and a certified hydrogeologist. I got over 24 years of experience performing engineering geologic studies in the city of Malibu and the adjacent Santa Monica Mountains. In regards to the subject property, I've studied at length since 2014, and also I've worked on many of the surrounding properties, performing studies for those sites for residential projects. And I'm just very familiar with the Via Cerro area, and we've determined by thorough study this is a safe and feasible project from a geologic standpoint. And I'm available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. All right, we have a couple speakers that I think are people that are not on here, which would be Norm Haney. No, the rebuttal will be after.
Good evening once again, City Council members. Norm Haney, 22741 Pacific Coast Highway. You know, for the first time in the history of Malibu, a determination has been made that the total development square footage structural size chart would not be used to establish the size of a home, which really turns the Malibu Municipal Code and the LCP on its ear. And a lot of it was based upon neighborhood standards. Neighborhood standards, as just explained by Mr. Schmitz, deals with an exception to the rule. When somebody doesn't want to follow the setback standards, they can justify it. If you go on Carbon Beach, say, and the standard setback there is supposed to be 20 feet, and everybody is 5 feet within a 500-foot radius, well, then you're allowed to go 5 feet. That's what the development standards provision is about. It's not about setting the character of the neighborhood. Now, people can have different opinions about what the neighborhood of the character of the neighborhood is. Okay, but if you look at how the Malibu Municipal Code was designed, it was designed to say rural residential. The size of the house is based upon the size of the lot. If you have a really big lot, you have a little bigger house. It's that simple. And that actually defines character. With regard to geology, you know, removal and recompaction doesn't always mean you're putting the dirt back the way you pulled it out. You can use geogrid, and I've seen 1 to 1.5 slopes using that. Very, very stable. You can also use cement-treated base material to put back in, and that hardens up really tight. So I agree with the geologist. I agree with what Mr. Smith just said. Let's listen to our licensed geologist that works for the state of California, rather than somebody from Harvard that has never even visited the property. Last but not least, the on-site wastewater treatment system. This is an advanced wastewater treatment system. What percolates down will have absolutely no bacteria in it at all, and 99.9% of the solids will be removed. As a consequence, it will percolate very quickly downward. The voids in the soil will not get clogged, causing them to move to the side. I think in this case, we listen to our specialists and our licensed professionals as well. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Norm. Is Daniel, you the attorney?
Yeah, I can be added to rebuttal.
Yeah. And Shahan? Shahan. Bakshande?
Good evening. My name is Shahan Bakshande. I live in 6277 Zuma Mesa Drive. I am here to support Mr. Lashkari in building his house. The reason I'm here today or tonight is basically the confusion and uncertainty that I felt when I watched the video of previous meeting, the May 22nd, I believe it was. What I heard was that Mr. Lashkari was asked to, well, he followed the rules of the city. He redesigned when he was asked to. He reduced the height of his property or proposed property. And the square footage of his house is quite a bit smaller than the neighboring two houses. The height is quite a bit smaller, and yet the square footage has to be reduced again, which he did. I'm just hearing that tonight. With the prices of the land getting more and more expensive, people want to have a house that answers to their needs, and their property is worthwhile. The investment is worthwhile. You understand that the uncertainty that I feel, what happens if my son wants to come around my house and build a house near me so he can live with me, close to us? what is going to happen then? Are we going to have the same back and forth? I traveled Canaan Doom almost every day. I traveled to the valley and back to home. The two huge houses are, one of them is the one that is objecting to this property. So I'm here just still uncertain and still questioning, and I know Mr. Lashkari. He had lived for a short while as my neighbor. He moved away. I'm delighted to hear that he's coming back to the neighborhood. I would love to enjoy his family's presence nearby. So I'm asking everybody that please let him be where he wants to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Lodi here, Sharon? Okay, and Lance? Okay. So then Jean? Well, so Christy, so this is the, yeah. Yeah, he has 6 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much, the council and mayor, for letting me speak. I have some points. I listened with great amount of interest because one of the things that the project developers and all their people are doing is cite all the time, license this, license that, city license, his license, lots of experience in the region. Well, here's the interesting part. Our experience was exactly that. We had absolutely the identical language. You're licensed, the city approved license. This is all tested. We had test pits. We had 5 test pits. It was identical. I now read their, since the last meeting, I read their geology report. It reads in terms of recommendations, almost identical to what ours did, okay? And it includes the R&R compaction, which, by the way, was done over our ancient landslide and down through it. The first large rain, 2 years after this project was completed, it slid immediately, And as you heard our expert, Mr. Schmitz, saying, it was because it was saturated downstairs. That's not what happened. What happened was that there were micro channels coming in through the side. In fact, I invite the entire council to come and look at it. I take the plastic off the side, and you can see striations on the side where the water was pushing. And what they did is that water was coming through. It came into a block, which was the R&R block, and it pushed. Tremendous force. Took about a month for the water from the start of the rain until it showed up, which tells you the water came from very far away, far up, put a lot of pressure on it, and initiated the landslide. All of that water had to go through under our property and under Mr. Lashkari's property. So it's there, it's microfiches. Now here's the interesting part. Their geology report doesn't say one word about underwater drainage, underwater water pressure, not one word in that geology report. That the city approved, everybody's licensed, and I talked to the city geologist today. He said, we don't have a requirement to look at that. We only have a requirement to do R&R. That's a standard. I agree it's a standard. It's a standard that failed in our neighborhood. It failed in a direct, we have direct experience with it. And let me tell you, once it failed, every one of these licensed experts headed for the hills. They all disappeared. No one took any responsibility. They all take these disclaimers in the reports very seriously. Oh, you know, bad things happen. We're not responsible. We only do the best we can. And by the way, I agree, we have to do the best we can. But since we have an exact replica of what happened to us, why would you then repeat the experience? Why would you do the same thing again? when there's a simple solution? Put piles in the bedrock and reduce the amount of grading you do, and you got to fix. Why not do that? In fact, if you're going to live in a house, I would pretty much demand that, because you're taking a risk. When you're putting that R&R compact pad there, putting your house on it, and if I'm correct, and these microchannels are blocked, and they're not going to push the whole thing, push, by the way, right into our property, right into our house, that is a very likely happen. The city geologist happened to say, and I'm quoting him, not out of context, I believe, I think there's a 2% chance of a failure. 2% is the fact based on his experience. It's a number out of there. Would you fly an airplane with a 2% chance of failure? If you knew you had a 2% chance of you breaking your car going dead at freeway speeds, would you get in that car? And the answer is no. So it's a safety issue. And that's basically my story. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gene. All right, Beatrice.
I skipped over a part of my presentation. My academic, he's in the field all the time. That's why it took so long to get his information. And I skipped over his analysis of what's going on, which is basically that article that I sent to everybody, peer-reviewed by, and he's a PhD. He said that weathered bedrock on a hillside acts as a sponge absorbing rainfall and rain runoff. And that effectively prevents the topsoil and the loose surface on top from washing down in a mudslide type event. If that porousness of the weathered bedrock is blocked up, which is what R&R effectively does, it no longer has that absorbent sponge quality, and the water has to go somewhere. It's still there. It's coming from down the hill, it's coming from on top. So now it's gonna wash the topsoil and debris down, and all that subterranean flow is gonna build up pressure, a la what my dad said. Also, I'm very glad that Mr. Holtz spoke, because his father worked for, I think the name of the geology company was Byers-Kovac, at the same time that Byers-Kovac did a report on our property recommending the R&R. So, perfect. Also, our neighborhood is a prime example of what's happening with this loophole with the neighborhood standards application. It's zoned for agricultural. It's zoned R5. So obviously you're not going to get 10 properties within 500 feet. And the monster houses, the last two monster houses that were built, shows how that gap in interpretation is totally being exploited and turning a rural neighborhood into suburbia, Tudor dream house. And again, the Malibu mission statement, we're trying to keep Malibu, Malibu. We've got Laguna Beach, we've got Manhattan Beach, we've got all these other cities, no places like Malibu. And that's what's attracting people, but now they want to make it like where they came from. And I'm begging you, please, neighborhood standards apply, and please, our safety, because this is a trade-off between saving him some cost at the price of our lives. And personally, I don't understand, because the two prior owners sold this property for $400,000, 1.75 Ocean View acres for $400,000. That tells you something's wrong. They did not feel confident that they could build a house that they would feel comfortable putting their family in, and he's asking to float this house on compacted fill that's gonna move under the right conditions. It's just a matter of time. And nobody takes responsibility. We're gonna have to, because we have no choice, we're there. Once it goes, which is fairly predictable, just like an earthquake will eventually happen, just like a fire is eventually gonna happen, geologist is gone, he's got his 4 pages of disclaimers. Mr. Lashkar is gone because a corporation owns the property, so he's removed himself. City doesn't take any responsibility. Us, the ones that are here begging you, please, please protect us. Thank you.
Can we get that slide up, please? Again, for the record, Don Schmitz. That was interesting. Licenses, degrees, experience, those don't matter. Don't listen to that. There's been documented examples of things that have gone wrong. Did you drive a car getting here? I did. You ever fly on an airplane? I do. Hopefully they're well designed by very, very qualified people. And sometimes planes have crashed and sometimes cars have been poorly designed. But we most certainly require the people that know what they're doing in regards to engineering to design those cars and design those airplanes. We rely upon that. Now you heard anecdotal discussion in regards to removal and recompaction, providing a blockage to the water. That's called hydrostatic pressure. It's in the report. And any time that you do a removal and recompaction, you bench it in and you put drains back behind the recompacted material, so there is no hydrostatic pressure. Maybe they did have a bad engineer. Oh, that was interesting. The sins of the father shall be imparted upon the son, because ostensibly his father worked for a firm that worked for them. And I don't know if Mr. Holt's father, Jeff Holt, who's a very good man, by the way, did any work on their property. And I'm chafing a little bit, I'm sorry if it's coming through, over the conversation about them wanting to turn our town into where they came from. When they built their house in 1990, it was by far the biggest house in the neighborhood. Let's just be fair about this. We're following the rules, explicitly following the rules. All the objective rules, we are well under the total development square footage that we are allowed and that you have approved over and over and over again. Neighborhood standards doesn't apply. You do have authority to take a look at neighborhood character. There's 2 houses bigger, existing houses, and there's 2 houses smaller that are within 500 feet. We reduce the house to the degree that you asked us to do it, and we will be the only house that is 18 feet in height. We're asking for nothing special. We comply with every single aspect of the zoning code. Oh, we asked for a site plan review so that we didn't crunch the house up even further. But we all know this is a well-designed house, and we've done what you asked of us. Because we want it, because we just don't want our neighbor to have a certain size house, because we just don't believe the experts, is not a basis for them as our neighbors to plead to you to deny an application or to condition it inappropriately. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to council, and I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Good evening, members of the council. My name is Daniel Friedman. I'm with Jeffer Mangles Butler Mitchell. I'm here on behalf of the applicant. I just wanted to reiterate the findings of the staff report. We submitted a letter raising a lot of concerns about what looked like a lot of inapplicable discussion about findings that had nothing, or discussion about standards that had nothing to do with the findings, and a lot of disregard for those findings and the evidence that's required for meeting those findings. I think the staff report did an excellent job addressing those points, and I'd like to congratulate staff on that. And as part of that, I'd really like to sit here and state that we support the findings of the staff report, and we hope you do too. Now, in terms of your deliberation, one thing I want to point out is that not only do findings need to be justified with evidence, but if there's going to be modifications to the project, they need to be justified with some evidence as well. You need to justify why standards are being applied to the members of your community differently. And if there's going to be higher standards placed on this applicant versus others, there needs to be a reason for that. And ultimately, I just want to encourage this council to treat this applicant fairly in your deliberation, and to focus on the significance of the findings. And if you believe there's a reason that those findings can't be met, that needs to be justified, just like the Planning Commission's findings were supported with evidence, and just like the staff report's findings were also supported with evidence. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Carmine Lashkari. I'm the applicant. I just want to briefly say that I've done everything that I've been asked to do. I've gone beyond what the code asks, what the staff asks, and I've tried to cooperate with the neighbor, with my neighbor, with the appellant. I have reduced the size of my house, I've dropped the height of my house, I've changed the style of my house. I designed this house for my family, for my family's need and the extended family that lives with me. I have changed all of those. I've spent over $50,000 responding to a $500 appeal application, and the city machinery has spent probably as much as I have spent with staff time responding to these appeals and to these claims that have been proven to you to be unsubstantiated, such as the solar analysis, it's the movement of the sun in the sky, such as the discussion of my property sliding onto their property. There is a slope and topography. Just look at that. My property slopes away from their property. Very simple, basic, apparent, obvious facts. Thank you.
Mr.
Please
Lashkari.
let me build my house.
All right, council. Does anyone have any questions right now?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Lou.
I'd like to ask about the first thing that was brought up, which is essentially repairing that road. So can you tell me a little bit about what the process is for that?
I recall at the last hearing that the owner agreed that he was going to repair the road prior to the start of construction on this project.
Correct. For the record, we are conditioned to do an assessment before and after of the road, repair any damage from the construction. There was the one picture that the appellants showed where the road was chewed up. It's my understanding we didn't do that, but we don't care. We will go ahead and we will fix that one curve in there that's already torn up before we even begin, because we want to take it off the table, and so we will be responsible for any damage to the road.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to let the rest of the council know that I had a visit from Beatrice at my retail store. I learned nothing new. I took her position and listened with interest. I also had a visit from Don Schmitz at my office as well. Just wanted to reveal that. I learned nothing new. It's just reiteration of some of the things and the situations that are in the paperwork already. Thank you.
I had a similar conversation with Mr. Schmitz and Mr. Lashkari about the revised stuff that's in here. I have a question for, I believe it's Mr. Holt, and that is the piles safer than R&R?
It depends on the situation. In this case, you use piles or you use grading to produce a safe and stable building site. Certain sites need piles. Certain sites, grading accomplishes the same thing. The goal with this site, based on the studies, there was an identified, weathered bedrock profile beneath the property, substandard soils, material that would be considered subject to soil slippage, potentially a landslide movement. So it was determined that in order to mitigate that condition, a removal, recompaction, grading operation could take care of that completely to provide a safe and stable building site. Doing piles as an alternative, while an option, would be much more environmentally impactful because of drilling. There would be a vast number of piles, steel imported to the site, concrete trucks, multiple concrete trucks coming up the site, and then having to export all the drilling spoils. So it weighs out as a much more damaging and invasive operation than you can, as opposed to just grading alone.
That would be provided that there's no slide and the house doesn't move.
Yes, both are under the caveat. Yep, there's no slide. And based on our studies, we've had, again, my firm, we've had 9 borings. I think in total, between my firm and the prior consultants on the property, there's been over 20 exploratory holes on this property that have conclusively ruled out the absence of landslide debris beneath this building site.
So it would be your expert conclusion that the R&R for this site would be 100% accurate and suffice to meet the conditions of a safe building project?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
I got a question for you, or maybe planning. She brought up the liability issue, So what if the worst case scenario happens and their house slides down on top of their house? So who's liable? I mean, you've got a bunch of disclaimers, and so how's that work? Maybe the lawyer can answer that one.
That'd probably be a better question, but I believe everybody who's touched foot on that property, and then it'll be up to the lawyers to sort it out. But
so you're not liable, the guy who signs off on the geology thing?
I'm liable for my portion of the work, I am.
Okay.
Daniel Friedman, the JMBM, for the record. Councilmember Mullen, there's a whole body of law, and I'm sure your city attorney is very familiar with this, when there's landslide risks that deal with these types of situations. I'm sure you've experienced in other places in the city. And typically in those scenarios, it's the property owner whose land slides onto the neighbor's land who's going to be liable for that risk.
So we got that on tape? Just kidding.
What I would like to get on tape is that there's no evidence in the record that there are any landslides on this property. And I think there's been about 25 years of studies on that issue that I think is the most pertinent information.
But yes, we're aware that they're not on this property, but they are on the adjacent properties.
Yeah, there's plenty of slides in the vicinity, you know, and we've all experienced Cane and Doom sliding down right above that. But one comment that was brought up, and maybe the planning department can help me with this, is I think somebody there said there's been no, maybe Norm said, no, a recompaction house has never slid in Malibu. Is that true?
I think Mr. Schmitz might have mentioned that. I can't speak to whether that's true or not.
No house that Mr. Schmitz has ever worked on.
Well, that would be true, Mayor Peak. No house I've ever worked on has ever slipped. But I made the query to your city geologist and asked him how many homes has the city of Malibu processed that utilize removal and recompaction. And Councilman, I've done a lot with both technologies. There's some you definitely want to use caissons or piles. Others, removal and recompaction is the better option. I asked him how many had been done. He said he couldn't count. There'd been so many. I asked him how many had failed. Mr. Dean said 0. That none of the projects, and there's been commercial projects and residential projects, many, many, many that have been reviewed and approved by the city geology department and the city planning department and approved by the city. And according to Mr. Dean, none of them have failed.
Thank you. I'll make a few comments. I met with Mr. Lashkari and Don Schmitz. We reviewed at their invitation, and I reviewed the new redesign. And I also talked to Beatrix a couple of times. I had a question about her letter, and so I wanted to, first of all, say how much I appreciate how accommodating you've been all along on this project. I know it's been difficult for you, and I think that you've made some great accommodations, and I think those have been appreciated by the appellant herself. And thank you for taking the time to talk to me and explain everything about your project that afternoon that we met, and I sincerely appreciate that. And then with Beatrix, I read everything that she sent to me, and I was fairly impressed with her depth of research on all of these things. And I know that it's very personal because your family's experienced this. And so I'm in the position where, like, okay, what the heck is the ruling on the caissons, no caissons thing? So I did a little unscientific research, I guess you'd say. The house I live in, which is not in as steep an area, was built in 1963, and they did put caissons in. And I don't really know why, but it was required by the County of Los Angeles at the time. There's never been any slide in my section of the canyon, which is down the street from you guys. And I asked my mother-in-law, who was the one who built the thing, I said, why did they put caissons in? She said, well, that was rules, so that's the way we did it. I called another gentleman I know who's an architect and who is in the construction business. That's what he's been doing for a while, and has built a house in the nearby vicinity on an area on the other side of the canyon where there has been a slide. In fact, their whole road just slid down and turned into mud. The whole thing turned liquid. None of the houses slid down the hill. And so it seemed like his area was kind of a slide area too. And I asked him, I said, do you have caissons in yours? And he said, no, I'm recompacted, and I've never had a problem in the slide area. I said, well, what's the deal on this? I mean, who makes the determination? And he said, well, the rules are that you're supposed to go with the recommendation of the licensed professional who does the report. And I said, well, you've been no help at all. But, I mean, seriously, that's what he said. So as I always do at these things, I listen to what everybody says, and I read everything that I can. And there were some things that Beatrix referenced in her letter that she kept talking about on the 2014 report on page 42 and page 43. And I'm looking in this big giant thing, and I couldn't find it. So I called her up. I said, what is that? And she walked me through how to go on the on-base thing on the website and get the old report. And I broke it up. And I did actually reference the pages that she cited. And I have to say that as much as I appreciate all the hard work that you did, I have to point out that it's a little inaccurate what you said, okay? And to be fair, to really be fair, because you said, not to put you on the spot here, but I want to be fair to everybody. Within the applicant's 2014 land phases report on page 42, it says, based on the findings of our engineering geological study of the subject area, the recommended bearing material for the proposed residence and the second unit structure is the underlying competent weathered bedrock. So I went to that report, 190 pages that I printed out on my printer at home, because I like to do due diligence, and I noticed that it wasn't the whole sentence. The rest of the sentence says, or future certified compacted fill per the recommendations of the project geological engineer. So there's more to the sentence, and I have to point that out. And then the same thing on the next page, there was something left out. And so the report essentially says there's option 1 and there's option 2. 1, you can use caissons, and 1, you can do remove and recompact, okay? And to be fair, I would say that probably the most prudent way to make sure your house doesn't slide down the hill is to put caissons into bedrock, I'm guessing. But also, to be fair to the people who followed the rules all along, they went with a licensed professional. Notwithstanding your bad experience with previous licensed professionals, and they're following the rules. And I can't be here, and I'm all about what do the rules say and how we follow the rules, and I know I've held you guys to that at numerous times, and I did in the previous meeting. So it's not easy. I'm really sympathetic to your experience and everything that's happened to you, but the rules are you're supposed to follow the recommendations of a licensed professional. And I don't think it's not true. I think there has been a house or two that slid down the hill, and Pierce Brosnan's house is on the other side of the canyon and slid down the hill. But that's what I found in this thing. I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, but I want everybody to know the research that I did, listening to everything that was told to me by Beatrix. I appreciate everything that you've done so far to accommodate everything that the city has asked you to do in this long and tiring process. I know it's not been easy for you, and those are my comments for right now.
I'm just going to make a motion to adopt Resolution 17-19. And do you want me to read the rest of this? Okay.
Can I ask one quick question of...
Do you want to second it for discussion?
I'll second it for discussion.
Okay.
I'd just like to ask a quick question of Mr. Holt. You're of the Jeff Holt family? Just to get a background on...
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, real quick, on top of bedrock, there's an area that kind of mixes with the ambient soil that's above the bedrock. And is that going to be shaved away before the R&R is put in? Or is this just R&R and then 6 or 8 feet to the top of the bedrock?
The recommended removal recompaction would remove the topsoil, the unsuitable weathered bedrock profile down into good bedrock. So all this compacted fill would be properly keyed and etched onto bedrock, just the same way caissons would be embedded into bedrock.
Okay,
it's
so
achieving the same thing.
I appreciate that. I'm familiar. So just so everybody knows, when you key, that's the structure I'm doing with my fingers. you're bonding this top material that you're replacing with the granite or the substructure of the heavier material. Is
Yes,
that
we're bonding the compacted fill into the firm competent bedrock.
That's it. I'm familiar with that too. So if there is a water intrusion, when it comes to a keyed area, the keyed area directs it one side or the other. I'm pretty familiar with that as well. So if there was a water intrusion, because it's keyed, it spreads so that the load isn't initially in one area. It's actually spread out, and the idea of the keying is to address that. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. The compacted fill, the keyway, the key and various benches are provided with a sub-drainage system, gravel and perforated pipe in the fill. So any hydrostatic pressure or water migrating through that fill will be collected and then transported away and out of the slope.
Right, so
to
your
promote
Schedule
stability.
40 goes in there, the gravel goes on top of the Schedule 40.
Yes, sir.
And the Schedule 40 is perforated every 6 inches or 4 inches, whatever the standards are. So I'm just familiarizing myself and helping the council understand what the key element is and how that works. So the last question I have is that the substratus, the substantial soil area, is that the 4,000 PSI or 3,000 PSI that you're going to key into the bedrock? Did you get an analysis on the load and the compression value of that material that you're setting the house on?
I can't speak to the exact numbers because that's the geotechnical engineer. I'm the engineering geologist. The soils engineer has those finite properties, but we're keying and benching into the competent material. I think that it would be capable of supporting a 4,000 PSI foundation loads, but I don't know for certain. That's the soils engineer to say that for sure.
Okay, and then the super last question is, are you spreading the load out over the entire surface area, and we're not going to be missing a keyed area over near the guest house, for instance?
100% of that grading operation is going to be observed on a nearly full-time basis by the project geologist and the project soils engineer. We have to certify every square inch of the grading to make sure that all the bad material came out before the placement of the good compacted fill and the sub-drainage system. So 100% of that grading area is going to be verified by field geologists and certified with final reports.
So I thank you because your expertise is what we need to hear about so that it helps us make decisions and so that my limited knowledge is now increased. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I got a quick question for you. Kind of one for him. So you've heard their concerns, okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So can you speak to what their concerns are, which is there's a big rain, it comes down, and it washes the house away. Why should they not think that that's the case?
Well, to be honest with you, their concerns are my same concerns on every project I work on in the city of Malibu. I am responsible for the geologic conditions of the site to properly characterize and analyze those things to produce a safe and stable building site. So even without the extracurricular concerns of all the neighbors, we have 100% concern of this property for our client. So we're doing everything in our power to properly analyze the site and to write reports and provide recommendations to the standard of care and to the city of Malibu's codes and guidelines. So we've done everything we can on this property, and we've written a report and it's been thoroughly reviewed and provided recommendations for a safe and stable building site that's not only going to be free from landslide, slippage, and settlement on our site, but also will not have an adverse effect on any of the adjacent properties.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Gene?
I need to get in a little more technical on one particular thing. They're mischaracterizing the way the water pressure works. It doesn't come in and sort of flow all over the place and sort of float and stuff like that. That's not what happens. What happens is there are striations in the break face there, where the slide starts. They're little narrow strips, 2 or 3 yards wide, 2 or 3 inches high. And you see the water seep out there. There's a lot of hydrostatic pressure there. So what really happens is on multiple points on that face where the slide starts, it's being pushed. And the way in their report, they handle the drainage, subterranean drainage, is to right at the bottom of the key, put a perforated pipe, plastic pipe, 4-inch pipe, and they put approximately 1 foot of gravel around it. Well, that doesn't touch all the different points of pressure that you have up and down. Oh, and they repeat that every 20-foot height, which isn't the case because there isn't that much here. So you are going to totally miss all the places where the hydrostatic pressure comes and pushes against that landmass, which is the R&R mass. The system of drainage doesn't work because the water never reaches there. It pushes the mass. That's what it did to us. And you can actually see that on our property. You can actually see that. So the particular drainage approach that Mr. Holt and people are taking, it doesn't work in our particular case. We saw it fail. And we're in the
Gene, when was your house built?
90, I think it was finished in 92.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Anyway, I just want you to know that the mechanism of the start of the landslide isn't as described and isn't taken care of by their drainage system. It doesn't even touch it. We found the drain, which daylights out in the canyon, was always dry, even though while the whole land was being pushed. Thank you.
We have a motion with a first and a second. Are we going to go for a roll call?
Mayor Peak, I just wanted to add that in looking closely at condition number 79, which calls for a pre-construction survey of Via Acero and then subsequent repair of it, that's a little different than the voluntary repair that the applicants offered to make. If you want to memorialize that as a condition, I would suggest adding that as an additional condition.
All right, I'm going to add that condition. Is that accepted?
Yes. You're welcome. I said something more.
All right, we're going to go for a roll call.
Last comment real quick. So, back to the engineer again, sorry, Mr. Holt. Don't have to come up, if we reduce the house in size and complexity in several thousand square feet, also Mr. Schmitz had mentioned to me that they took out some subterranean surface area, is that correct? There was something that you took out?
Through Mayor Peak. Councilman Wagner, in the redesign subsequent to the May City Council hearing, we had incorporated a basement. However, Bonnie and her staff indicated that the time required for them to review that for consistency with code would result in a delay, so we took that out. So essentially the footprint and the location of the house is essentially what was before you back in May.
Okay, so the subterranean area remains?
The location and the foundation design, the removal and recompaction is the same. We also did a depth to groundwater study, which was required by the city, and I think it was at least 50 or 60 feet below. So there is no accumulated groundwater that would impact the removal and recompaction.
I don't think it really, I mean, even if they were to add the basement.
We would love to have a basement if you're okay with it, but
no, what I was trying to do is you reduce the load on whatever soil you're going to put the key event on.
It's true if we did if we dug a hole and put a concrete box in it that was a 1,000 square foot basement, then yes, that would further anchor the house into the competent bedrock. That is a fact.
Thank you.
All right, roll call.
Mayor Peak?
Yes.
Councilmember Rosenthal?
Yes.
Councilmember Lamont?
Yes.
Councilmember Wagner?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Mullen?
Yes.
Motion carries.
5A.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I don't have anything to add to the written report and the report we made from the closed session, so why don't we just hear the speakers?
Okay. Ted Vale, followed by Paul Grisani.
Ted Vale, I've lived in Big Rock for 43 years. I too saw the recent fire, and it brought to mind the fact that we all have to be aware of that. Before I get into my comments on this matter, I wanted to just say that in '93, I did a film, Surviving the Malibu Wildfire, and we lost 25% of the homes in Big Rock and 400 in Malibu. If you would like to have that video and show it to remind people in Malibu that they must protect their houses against fires, I'd be happy to make it available to you. I've also been a lawyer for 50 years, and I am glad to hear that all of you have decided to take this case to the Supreme Court. They don't have to hear it, but it's an important issue, and it's important not only for the city of Malibu, but it's important for many other cities in California who have ordinances similar to this that could be affected by the decision that the appellate court made. And unfortunately for them, they did not have anyone suing them so they could resolve the issue. They now have an ordinance in place that is exactly or similar to yours, and if the Supreme Court rules, they may be in trouble. So I do hope that you vigorously pursue the appeal, and I urge you to get other cities like Del Mar to file an amicus brief in cases like this. The amicus brief can often expand the significance of the case. And the Supreme Court does not look at a case like the appellate courts and the trial courts do. They are looking at the precedent, and they are deciding what to follow. The Supreme Court makes the precedent, and if they decide that that looking at the whole state and not just a city or a district is important, they are looking at policy, not only precedent, and they can set it based on policy. So I congratulate you on your decision to take this forward. It's going to be important for Malibu. It's going to be important for the whole state. And Mr. Soboroff, you're going to lose. Thank you.
Spoken as a true activist. Paul, his best friend.
Makes me a true reactionary then. Mayor and City Council, thank you so much for staying late enough to see me tonight. I do apologize for having the termetry to leave and get something to eat and come back. I won't even mention what it was, but it was good. Anyway, I cannot believe that we are throwing a tiny bit of good money after the bad we've already lost. And it reminds me once again that how much happier I would have been if we'd asked Mr. Reiner to pay for the defense of this poorly written, improperly drafted, and dishonestly promoted thing that was presented as Measure R. And I know that you're going to go the way you're going, and I know that you're just buying another couple months. Well, what's next? What are you going to do next? That's what you're supposed to be leading us somewhere. So where's next? Thank you. And have a good evening.
Thank you, Paul.
No actions required.
Resist. Paul, just remember to resist.
No actions required, just receive and file the report.
All right. Thank you. Receive and file that one. And we are at somewhere in my little folder here. 7A, which is my appointment to Parks Public Safety. I don't know why we don't see the, wait. I'm going to appoint Fred Roberts. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Fred Roberts. Frederick Roberts. He is a retired LA City fire captain.
City? What's wrong?
But he lives in Malibu and has for a long time. I think he'll be a good person to serve us. Unfortunately, Mr. Addison was unable to meet the time commitment related to that position with a conflict at his work. So that's why he.
That's a joke, by the way. We love the city fire department. They're fine professionals.
All right, 7B. Designation of voting delegate and alternative voting delegate for the 2017 League of California Cities Annual Conference in Long Beach.
I have a question about this.
And ask it.
I thought, what's the Long Beach thing? I thought it was in September in Sacramento.
The amended agenda corrected the location, so if you have the amended staff report, it's in Sacramento from September 13th to the 15th. There was an error in the original report.
See, I do read these things. Pretty cool, huh? That's good. All the way to 7B, I'm reading.
I'll make a motion to have the mayor and mayor pro tem as the, are you both going?
I plan to.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the mayor and mayor pro tem is our voting delegate and alternate?
Sounds good.
So you have to stay late on the last day?
Understood.
I mean, yeah.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah. Well, no, you.
Just kidding. I'll
yeah.
fulfill my obligation.
Okay. Thank you for taking
I'll
this
second
on.
that.
All right. All in favor? Aye.
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 We are adjourning. Thank you. Good night.